A quorum being present, I call to order the third session of the 2019 annual town meeting. Could we have quiet, please? This means you. As you may have noticed, we have only two microphones this evening, and at the head of the two center aisles, our microphone people have not figured out what the problem was with the two mics on the extremes during the last two town meetings. Could we have quiet, please? Town meeting is in session. I'd like to acknowledge the presence of Nika Ellugardo, who is a state rep and represents Precinct 5. Thank you. Now, one of the consequences of a kinder and gentler town meeting that we've had for the last couple of sessions is that the speakers have done a dismal job of keeping to their time limits. I'm going to be more exercise a little more discipline this evening. We have a great deal of work to do, and we're likely to go to a fourth night, but I'd like to certainly get as much done this evening as possible. So I will warn each speaker when he or she reaches 4 minutes that he or she has 1 minute left. The only exceptions are the few speakers who I've permitted to exceed 5 minutes. Now, you may recall at the first session of the town meeting, we moved Article 10 relating to the acquisition of the Newbury College property to the last item on the warrant. And the purpose of that was to give us more time in case the town and the college came to some kind of agreement. Well, that appears to be totally impossible at this point. And so Mr. Green has asked that we move Article 10 again and hear it at the beginning of this town meeting, that is now. Is there a second to that motion? Second. All those in favor of moving Article 10 to the first item of business this evening, please raise your hands. Those opposed? Motion carries unanimously. And I call on Mr. Green.
Thank you. Bernard Green, Chair of the Select Board. The Select Board would like to provide town meeting with an update on the town's efforts to acquire all or a part of Newbury College, which will explain why we are not moving warrant Article 10 tonight. We've asked Newbury College Acquisition Advisory Committee member Ranch Kimball to provide that update. Ranch is uniquely qualified to do this. He has extensive experience consulting and serving on nonprofit boards, including serving as a member and former chair of the Wheelock College Board of Trustees. Wheelock has a significant presence in Brookline and was recently merged into Boston University. Ranch now serves on the board of Boston University. He's a resident of Precinct 1. Ranch serves on the Acquisition Advisory Committee along with Helen Charlupsky, School Committee, George Cole, Building Commission, Janet Fierman, Building Commission, Steve Hyken, Planning Board, Nancy Heller, Chair of the committee and member of the Select Board, Georgia Johnson, Fisher Hill Neighborhood resident, Bobby Nabel, Advisory Committee, Paul Sainer, Economic Development Advisory Board, Kathy Spiegelman, who has expertise in higher education planning and real estate, and Neil Wyszynski, former Chair of the Select Board. So as you can see, this is a very capable, high-powered, and very, very competent board to address this fairly complex situation. Mr. Kimball?
Mr. Kimball?
Thank you, Bernard, and thank you, Sandy, Mr. Moderator. I'm Ranch Kimball, and it's you're very nice to let a newbie get up and kick off town meeting on a rainy Tuesday. I have one goal tonight, which is to finish in 4 minutes and 59 seconds. I write my own jokes. I don't have a speechwriter like some of you, so if you don't, anyway, they're not funny. Let me just start with the headline, which for those of you who read the handout, we, the town, were not the high bidder, or we were not the chosen bidder by Newbury College, and we've been informed through our real estate advisor, McCall and Almy, that Newbury College is currently negotiating a purchase and sale agreement with another bidder. So that's the headline. I think what I can do tonight is to give you, as the leadership of our town, some understanding and comfort in the process that the committee went through. I'd like to thank the Select Board for their involvement and support, and Bernard read the names of the committee. It was an excellent, hardworking committee. So let me now open it up a little bit and go through 3 areas to help give you some context. We started out first by trying to understand Newbury College, their shutdown process, their sales process. To do that, I personally had 2 one-on-one meetings with the chairman of their brokerage firm, Colliers, who was representing Newbury. I know we were the first potential bidder to have such a meeting. The Attorney General in Massachusetts, as in other states, regulates the sale of any college assets, such as real estate. And so a delegation of the Newbury Committee went to meet with the Attorney General to discuss both the town's role and potential bidding strategies. We were the first bidder to do that, and I believe we were the only bidder to do that. The Board of Higher Ed and the Commissioner of Higher Education were regulating the timing and the process of Newbury's shutdown. So we went to see in person the Commissioner of Higher Education. We were the only bidder, well, the first bidder to do that, and I believe we still were the only bidder to do that. So we put a lot of work in up front, trying to understand how Newbury would look at this process. Second, there was a lot of detailed work and analysis to be done, given this was a large real estate transaction. We hired 3 top-notch advisors, McCall and Almy, who've executed several $1 billion of academic real estate transactions, an architectural firm to look at various fit-out schemes within Newbury College and the appropriateness of those buildings, and third, an engineering firm to look at the state of good repair of the buildings and what deferred maintenance and liabilities might be there. All 3 did an excellent job. McCall and Almy, our real estate advisor, also prepared a range of valuation scenarios. They started with the A&R, approval not required subdivision, that the Newbury broker had kindly put together for us, and looked at other uses, looking at a high and low valuation scenario. So as we were preparing our bidding strategy, we had a great depth of analytic work behind that. Finally, on the financial side, we looked carefully at the costs, both the income statement side as well as the balance sheet. Mel, Allison, and Melissa and their team did a superb job looking at the actual operating cost if we were to own the property. We still had to maintain the buildings, heat them. We still had to maintain the land. We looked carefully at the reduction in CIP, capital improvement projects that would have to occur if, in fact, we covered the cost of the acquisition by reducing CIP before we decided on permanent use and permanent financing. Several of us working together did a detailed pro forma, again, on both the income statement and balance sheet side, doing a full 29-year view of what it would cost to buy that campus until the final permanent financing would have been extinguished. All told, when I personally added up the work that the outside advisors had been done and that had been done outside of the committee, it was something north of 250 hours of work done outside the committee meetings to inform the process. So in short, I think I can stand here as a citizen of this town, as someone who's been through this process on both sides, and say it was, for me, a satisfying, gratifying process. We worked hard. We prepared a set of good bids. And let me just close with that to give you the nature of our bids. I will note, as was written in the excellent summary that you have in your handout, the sale is not yet done. It still could change. Things could still open back up. So I'd prefer very much not to, and I recommend that the town officials not comment on our bids or pricing because we may yet get involved.
30 seconds.
I will tell you the nature of our bids. We submitted 4 different bids in 3 different structural configurations, trying very hard to meet Newbury's structure. Our first bid was a simple bid with no financing contingency and no due diligence contingency, probably a very simple bid. So I'll just wrap up by saying it was a very good process. The town put its best foot forward, and on behalf of the committee, we appreciate the support of the town, its officials, and the select board. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you. Now, I'll take a few questions. There bear in mind that the answers are likely to be not very informative because there's a problem of an ongoing negotiation, and we don't want to disclose negotiation strategy. Mr. Burstein?
Yes, Mr. Moderator. Michael A. Burstein, Precinct 12. One thing I'm wondering about, given the previous resolution where we said we were hoping to purchase the land by any means, including eminent domain, is it possible that someone who purchases it and then the town could try to make a purchase from them, and if not, then try to move forward with eminent domain?
I think the answer is yes.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Mr. Hochleitner?
Hi, Brian Hochleitner, Precinct 6. I note that the piece of paper we got today mentioned that the town met with a number of prospective bidders to talk about potential future zoning changes. Is there any information that can be shared about who those prospective bidders were or what they might have asked?
The answer is no. Okay, we'll now...
Oh, one more.
Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. Mr. Golson.
Ken Goldstein, Precinct 14. Picking up on the question about eminent domain, my question is, are we considering an eminent, eminent domain? And I know a number of good suggestions for town uses came up through the earlier process. Specifically, I think, Beep headquarters there seems like something worth pursuing. And how do we open the discussion of whether eminent domain is an option for us?
Mr. Green?
I think all we can say is that we're staying involved in the process, and we are a town, and that gives us certain leverage, and we'll decide as this unfolds how we respond.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we now proceed to Article 17. The main motion under Article 17 is on the pink supplement number 2, page 1, moved by Mr. Gordon, seconded by Ms. Heller, that to amend the town's bylaws relating to naming public facilities. And on that motion, the following words need to be added at the beginning of the motion. Voted that the town, and then strike the words move to, so it reads, voted that the town amend section 6.8.2, et cetera, in the words of the motion. The Ms. Khan, seconded by Mr. Lynn Jones, moves to refer the matter of Article 17 to the Committee on Town Organization and Structure. That motion is found on page 17-6. Mr. Gordon.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Neil Gordon, Precinct 1 Town Meeting member of the Advisory Committee, speaking as petitioner of Article 17. I ask that you add the voice of diversity to the town's naming committee to bring to that committee an important and currently missing point of view. That's it. The rest is details. 14 years ago, town meeting established the Review Committee for the Naming of Public Facilities, commonly referred to as the Naming Committee. The current bylaw provides for 5 committee members plus an alternate, members appointed and reappointed by the Select Board. Designated by the bylaw are a member each of the Parks and Recreation Commission, the School Committee, the Preservation Commission, and the Advisory Committee. Note the mandated composition, particularly Parks and Rec, Schools, and Preservation. With all due respect to the members of the Naming Committee, the mandated membership is mostly about things, about fields and parks and schools, and about preservation, as some might define that preserving the status quo. In its mandated composition, I don't see much about honoring deserving individuals or organizations, or memorializing significant events, which is presumably why we name things. In its mandated composition, I don't see much about honoring, or even considering honoring, deserving individuals who are members of Brookline Protected Classes, a term that's defined in the bylaw that established the Diversity Commission. There's a missing voice, and that's what brings me here tonight. So how do we name our public places? Naming recommendations are made subject to approved criteria that the naming committee itself established. As the committee's chair stated, we just apply the criteria. A robot could do it. A robot, applying a static, never changing, never evolving criteria. The criteria, which includes, quoting from the policy, a significant donation or bequest, establishment of a trust, or other similar action. It seems not that long ago we heard from this podium, but he paid for the school. And in discussing my warrant article, I've heard several ideas about memorializing the wealthy as a way to balance our town and school budgets. Perhaps we might place more emphasis on memorializing Brookline values. The naming committee can be a powerful and intimidating force. Members of the committee pretty much said so when this warrant article was before the advisory committee. Precinct 1 town meeting member Deborah Brown said so after she faced the committee on the proposed renaming of what's now the Coolidge Corners School. At the advisory subcommittee hearing on this article, one member of the public spoke against the idea that having a member of the diversity commission on the naming committee. She argued that under the existing bylaw, any member of the public could speak at a naming committee hearing, so there's no need for a change. But speaking at a hearing is not the same as having a seat at the table. Being at the table, perhaps expressing a more diverse point of view, and voting that point of view matters. The advisory committee offers a motion to refer this article to the Committee on Town Organization and Structure. I ask you to vote no on the advisory committee's motion. The bylaw amendment I speak to tonight is straightforward. It doesn't need to be studied. It doesn't need to be referred. Bring the main motion to the floor and please vote yes. Vote yes because Brookline needs diversity to be at the table. Thank you.
Mr. Lebo?
I pulled my back getting here. I just want you to know that, so I'm a little stiff. Fred Lebo, Chair of the Naming Committee for the last 14 years. The petitioner, who I'm friendly with, also eats with me at Busy Bees from time to time, and has come to the wrong conclusion. No, there's nothing wrong with Busy Bees. Wrong conclusion, based on the fact that never once has he ever had a discussion with me about how the naming committee works, or has attended a single meeting on how it works. Putting people on the diversity committee would be like putting people on the diversity committee on the tree planting committee or on the solid waste advisory committee. To what end? I asked the petitioner, did he have a problem with any of the personnel in the committee? He said no. Did he have a problem with our policies and criteria for naming something in the town? He said no. He believed the justification for having 2 members on the advisory committee would improve our policies and criteria. However, anybody located in this room, in this building, in this town, or who lives in Massachusetts, or in the United States, or maybe even Mars, can make suggestions or ask for a hearing at any time by contacting me or contacting the select board to make any suggestions about our policies and criteria. No one has to be there to make those suggestions. The petitioner believes that the naming committee generates names for people who want it to be honored by the town. Wrong. Applicants who come to the naming committee tell us what names they would like to have and where they would like to place the names. Once an applicant has been approved by the naming committee, we would send that recommendation to town meeting. However, there is no requirement to file an application to the naming committee, as the applicant can file a warrant article directly to the town meeting for their approval. We are essentially a clearinghouse. Prior to the naming committee, in 14 years, we would have had approximately 55 names submitted to town meeting for their approval. Instead, in 14 years, we've had about a handful of recommendations to town meeting. The following are a list of names who we have approved and recommended to the town meeting. Thomas Hennessy Park, located in the front of the high school. He was not only a Patriots football player, chair of the select board, and chair of the school committee. Jack Corain was captain of the Olympic hockey team and won the Olympics. We didn't name, but they requested to have their name put on the skating rink. Robert Lynch was the director of Park and Recreation and saved the golf course from becoming privatized. This was brought to us very quickly after Robert Lynch had retired to the town. We changed that criteria so that all town employees have to wait 2 years before the naming committee could consider their application. Application was filed by the selectmen to rename Harry Downs Field as Robert Kraft had given the town $500,000. Plus, a National Football League gave us $200,000 to install synthetic grass at the field, which approximately cost $900,000. The naming committee decided to name the Harry Downs Field as the Kraft Family Facility at Harry Downs Field. This was done because we thought that it was inappropriate to move the name of Harry Downs, as he was a famous football coach, a famous coach in the town of Brookline. I'm almost done. However, no one from the Kraft family or Robert Kraft himself ever required the town to memorialize his name or the family's name in the contribution he made.
You have 1 minute.
Okay. Veterans Affairs filed an application to the naming committee for a veteran to have his name placed in a square. All servicemen must go through the Veterans Affairs Department and vetted by that department prior to filing an application to the naming committee for our approval. The naming committee recommended Paul Pender name to be placed on half a rotary, as the other half was located in Boston. Paul Pender was a world-class prize fighter who also was a firefighter for the town of Brookline. He taught children in the town who were interested in learning how to box. Skyline Park was a name that was considered as a placeholder for some individual who wanted to meet the criteria for the naming committee.
Please conclude, Mr. Lebo.
We're almost done. Thank you. There are three problems with this article. The town of Brookline staff who coordinates the meetings for the town committee.
No, Mr. Lebo, please conclude.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
This is my second time, by the way. The naming committee recommends
No,
referral
Fred.
to the committee on the town organization and structure.
Thank you. Ms. Heller?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Nancy Heller for a unanimous select board. We're agreeing with the petitioner that we should not refer this to CTO&S. Why would we refer it? We should have the Commission on Inclusion, Diversity, and Community Relations at the table. We're discussing many times, not only in this town meeting, but in others, about the issues of equity, racial justice, etc. Why would we not want to have that point of view and sensitivity represented at the meetings of the naming committee? The naming, it's not enough just to ask people to come to the committee and express their opinions. We want to have deliberation. We want to have insights. We want to have the sensitivity that a member of that commission could bring to the naming committee. So the the select board first considered this article in March, and we voted 5-0 to support the petitioner's version. We had a chance to reconsider, and we did not do that because we do believe that the petitioner is correct in this instance, that we should vote favorable action on his motion to put a member of the Commission on Inclusion, Diversity, and Community Relations on this committee. It's an important symbol, and we should do it tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Khan. And Ms. Brown, would you come forward, please? No, just have a seat. We'll hear from Ms. Khan first. Sorry.
Janice Khan, town meeting member from Precinct 15, speaking for the advisory committee, for majority of the advisory committee. So warrant Article 17 seeks to amend Section 6.8.2 of the town's bylaws. It would make changes in the composition of the naming committee, increasing the number of members from 5 to possibly 7, and designate 1 seat for a member of the Commission for Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Relations, which I'll shorten to Diversity Commission just to not use up as much time. And all of these positions are appointed by the Select Board. So referral does not mean that we as a legislative body don't want to have a person from the Diversity Commission on the naming committee, but rather we see it as an opportunity. The petitioner has raised an important issue about who should sit on our boards, which I think is the broader issue that probably many in this town care about. The role of CTO&S, according to Article 2.3 of the town's bylaws, is to review any changes in the organization and structure of the governmental bodies. There are 101 boards and commissions listed on the town's website, not all of them currently meeting, and 28 departments. So wouldn't it be, so one of the perspectives of the advisory committee is that we see this as an opportunity not to just focus on a single board, but to really take a deeper look and see if this shouldn't be happening more broadly. So again, the Select Board can, right now, put a member of the Diversity Commission on the naming committee. And as was stated, any member of the public can add a criterion to the 4 that exist right now. So after reaching consensus, the naming committee makes a recommendation, as the chair said. Since August 2014, it's considered the naming of a field, 2 squares, a park, and the clock triangle in Brookline Village. It also, in 2018, held a public hearing to review warrant articles related to the renaming of the Devotion School and Washington Street. The advisory committee acknowledges the good intent of the petitioner, especially given the town-wide concerns and the lack of diverse representation on elected and appointed boards, commissions, and committees in Brookline. But again, it was the majority opinion of the advisory committee that the place to start to address this larger concern that is implicit in the petitioner's article is not with a single committee, but rather by taking a more comprehensive approach and having the subject matter of warrant Article 17 be referred to the Committee on Town Organization and Structure for further examination. And by a vote of 13 in favor, 7 opposed, and 1 abstention, the advisory committee recommends favorable action on the referral. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. And Ms. Vanderzeel, would you come forward, please?
Hi, my name is Deborah Brown. I'm from Precinct 1. I went before the naming committee last year, and I am sure that everyone there was extremely well-intentioned, but it had to be one of the most brutal experiences that I have had in my professional career. I mean, I can count on one hand the number of times, it was one of the worst experiences that I've ever had, meeting in a public forum. And I've been to some shaky. I've been to places where I had to be escorted out of town by law enforcement. And I know the reality is that no one felt that they were treating me that way. And I suspect that everyone there would have said that was not our intent. But the reality is that's how it felt to me. And the one thing I was grateful for was I had a witness in Ruth Kaplan. And if Ruth Kaplan hadn't been there, I swear to God, everybody would have said, it was an okay meeting. But I think the vote was unanimous, unanimously opposed renaming the Edward Devotion School. I felt like when I walked in that 5 minutes in that minds were already made up. And if we're talking about being an inclusive community, we've got multiple warrant articles tonight that are, and tomorrow and Thursday night that are actually looking at the issue of how do we open our arms? How do we shift gears? How do we demonstrate that we are better than perhaps some of the things that we've done? And I think Neil's warrant article is clearly a step in the right direction. If you come to this town, what do you see? You see street names. You see the names on schools. Those are the things that you see. And if you don't have people with different experiences in the room saying, this is why this is important to me, then I think we lose something as the community that we aspire to become, the community that we aspire to become. So I don't want to ding anybody that's currently on that committee, but as a woman of color, as a woman who's worked in probably 40 of the 50 states, this town is unique in giving a whipping. I got a whipping that night. And so I don't want anybody else to experience that, because other people might say, I'm never coming back. I'm never coming back. And I think we can do better. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Vanderzeel. And then we'll take some questions.
I'm Cornelia Vanderzeel, a town meeting member from Precinct 15, but I'm speaking on behalf of the Commission for Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Relations. Just want to tell you that this warrant article is actually pretty simple. It simply allows an increase in the total number of people on the review committee for the naming of public facilities from 5 to 7. And it mandates the inclusion of a representative from the Commission for Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Relations. The alternate position would still be there. The Commission itself feels that the addition of one of its members would add a valuable voice to the committee, especially in the areas of equity and inclusion. A unanimous Commission for Diversity, etc., urges favorable action on the petitioner's motion and no action on the advisory committee's motion to refer to CTONS. We find referral an unnecessary and cumbersome step to the goal of adding a positive voice and perspective to the naming committee. I urge you to vote favorable action on the petitioner's motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gilman.
Jane Gilman, Precinct 3, thank you. Further to Ms. Heller's comments, I also want to speak to moving favorably on the main motion. If anything was evidence that we need to change and add to the composition of the committee, it is the litany of names that we heard tonight, all white men, and that needs to change.
Hi.
Thank you. Yes.
I'm Shira Fisher, town meeting member from Precinct 11, and that was going to be my question for Mr. Debo. It sounds like he's served on the committee for a long time, and I wanted to thank him for his service to Brookline, and I wanted to ask whether any names that have been put forward and accepted in the town of Brookline were women or people of color.
Well, Mr. Lebo has taken the opportunity to leave the auditorium, I believe. Mr. Lebo, you still here? I think the answer is to your question is no, but I'm not sure. Who was that? Ms. Benka?
Carla Benka, town meeting member, Precinct 13. I'm a member of the naming committee, representing the advisory committee. The naming committee does not initiate. The naming committee responds. So insofar as that we vet nominations, those nominations come from the general public.
Have any names that have come out of the committee been women
No,
or
you
people of
ask your
color?
questions to me, please.
Have any of the names that have come out of the committee been women or people of color?
Yeah, Ms. Benka?
None of the names that have been submitted to the naming committee have been women's names or
Thank
the
you.
names of people of color.
Yes, sir.
Jennifer Goldsmith, Precinct 11, and I'm sorry Mr. Lebo left. It sounded like he might have fallen on his way in, so I'm going to assume he left for health reasons, not out of disinterest. But by virtue of having done the survey of town meeting, I'm now the encyclopedia of your opinions, or at least 60% of you, and I will say that the opinions that we saw in that survey were a greater interest in diversity and a deep confusion about commissions, committees, membership. And although I understand and respect the advisory committee wanting to go to sort of a more procedural approach and a more systematic approach, this is a transparent and clear step to change. And doing this doesn't preclude further process. So I guess my question, or that's really my question in the form of a question, is does the advisory see any reason, if we were to approve this warrant article, not to go ahead and continue with the process of looking at membership of commissions?
Ms. Khan?
Thank you for your question. That's a good question. So we would, at advisory, we thought of it quite differently, that there are ways in which this town operates. And the CTONS was specifically founded in order to look at changes in composition in governmental organizations. And so the proper way to do it, according to the way the town is set up, is to go through CTONS. That's the way we do. Can you go and do a single committee? Of course, that would be possible. But if the larger goal is to increase diversity, which I know from the results of the survey is much broader than the naming committee, which has named barely half a dozen things in the last 10 years, that to have a bigger impact, it might be worth having CTONS really take a deeper dive into this and make a larger impact.
Thank you.
And can I just add on to my question, or am I done?
Do you have a brief question?
Well, I just have a follow-up. I just want to echo that when I heard Mr. Lebo name the names, it was striking how similar they were, and sort of tone deaf that he seemed unaware of the naming issues around the Coolidge Corner School. And I think many people in this room had that same feeling of like, wow, this is not a very strong argument for keeping the commission the way it stands right now. So
Thank you. Mr. Fry?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Ernie Fry, Precinct 7. This article has been, there have been comments from the Diversity Commission opining on the value of this warrant article. Why could not the CTONS have met prior to this meeting to make their feelings known about why this article could not be considered by them prior to us getting together?
Is there anyone here from CTOS? Mr. Rosenthal? Come to a microphone, please.
I was on the speaker list, I think. Should I come up there?
Well, yeah. First, answer Mr. Fry's question.
CTOS did not convene in the last couple of weeks that this referral motion was on the table, so has not discussed it. And I think that's the short answer. The committee meets as needed. I actually have with me, if there are questions later, the things we've looked at in the last decade.
Oh, I think we'll not go into that, Mr.
Right.
Rosenthal.
So I think that's the short answer to the question.
Okay, Ms. Benka?
Carla Benka, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 13, and a member of the Naming Committee. With your permission, I'd like to correct the record. When the question of renaming the devotion school came before the Naming Committee, it was not unanimously opposed. I believe the vote was 3 members opposed and 2 in favor.
Thank you, Ms. Frawley.
Thank you. Regina Frawley, Precinct 16, and many people in this room know I care about process. I have to affirm the advisory committee's, Ms. Khan's comment. why, I've attended many meetings of the CTOS, as many as they've had for years, which is to say not many. But when they do, when there's a change, they always are the board that people go to. I've written several bylaws. I've gone to them more than once. It is the proper procedure. To do this tonight without going through the proper procedure is to make an exception, and that basically makes the bylaw meaningless and the process meaningless. So I see no reason why it can't go through the proper procedure, and several reasons why it should go through that procedure. And I hope that we will continue to do that. And then I advise everyone who has a stake in this, emotionally, morally, or otherwise, show up at those meetings because it makes a difference. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pelkey.
Mr. Moderator?
You're
I've been
next.
standing here for a bit.
Ms. Pelkey was at a microphone before you were.
Okay.
Ms. Pelkey.
Thank you. Linda Olson-Pelkey, Precinct 2. I just had a question why the petitioner felt it necessary to add the phrase "not more than 7 members" to the suggestion for expanding the naming committee.
Mr. Gordon?
Not more than 7 gives the select board the flexibility to not fill all the positions. There have been issues on other committees and commissions regarding quorum when the committee's not full. That's why.
Can I follow up, please? Because
Go ahead.
that didn't get at my question. So I'm wondering what the issue is, why you didn't want to have more than 7.
I thought Mr. Gordon tried to answer that. If you want to give it another try, Mr. Gordon?
So it's currently 5. The warrant article would mandate 1 additional that would eliminate the at-large position. I didn't want to eliminate the at-large position, and so I added 2. It could have been 9. It could have been, but it isn't.
It is what's before you. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, Carol Hillman, town meeting member from Precinct 1. I heard Ms. Benka and Mr. LeBeau both say that it was not the committee's job to initiate naming, and I'm wondering why that is, and if there's some good reason for that, perhaps we should consider changing their mission to include proposing names.
I think that's what's provided in the bylaw. Is that correct? It is. Mr. Wyszynski?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Neil Wyszynski, Precinct 5. I think this is a pretty simple decision on our part. It's one I don't think that we need to study anymore. You're either for it or against it. I'm for it, and I call the question.
Well, there's a rule in our procedure that you can't take advantage of making comments at the microphone to follow it with a call for the question. So we'll hear from Ms. Nabel. We'll hear from Ms. Nabel, and then I'll take the motion for the question.
I'm Bobby Nabel, town meeting member from Precinct 10, speaking in support of Warrant Article 17. The naming committee was appointed in 2005, and since then, using the criteria agreed to by the committee and the select board, makes naming recommendations for town property. Why then are additions to the committee's membership being recommended? Because since 2005, some things have changed. Historically, public roads, buildings, and schools are named after individuals in recognition of their philanthropy, accomplishments, or service. But recently, many have begun to question whether these criteria alone are sufficient. Should we continue to display monuments and buildings on government land, honoring those who fought on the side of the Confederacy to preserve slavery? Should we maintain the name of Yawkey Way, a public street in Boston, commemorating the man whose opposition to the integration of baseball resulted in the Red Sox being the last team in the league to sign a black player? Should colleges change the names of buildings and programs funded by the Sacklers, whose wealth was at least in part derived from overuse of opioids, now determined to result in addiction and death? What action, if any, should be taken if a school has been built on land bequeathed to a town and named after the benefactor, a man who was not only a slave owner, but whose legacy to the town included a slave? Some of these questions are still under discussion, but reflecting the growing change of public values, Boston renamed Yawkey Way, and Brookline is in the process of renaming the Devotion School. Responding to the change in public values is likely to increase the naming committee's workload by requiring that the committee collect more detailed information about nominees beyond their philanthropy and primary accomplishments. Efforts to achieve more diversity of nominees will require increased outreach. And as the remaining number of suitable naming sites diminishes, the selection of nominees may become more difficult and more time-consuming. The naming choices we make are intended to last for generations. This warrant article anticipates the increased difficulty the naming committee faces in carrying out its responsibilities as it attempts to reflect the changing values. The article not only maintains the current representation of the committee, but also increases by 2 the maximum number of members appointed to the committee. 1 would be a representative from the Commission for Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Relations, bringing that perspective to the committee's work. In addition, it also allows the committee to choose to appoint an additional member should it want further to expand its expertise or to better distribute its workload and avoid overburdening its members. It is for these reasons that I support Warrant Article 17 and hope you will vote in favor of it.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, I don't think we need a motion for the question. You see no one else at the microphone. I have no one else signed up to speak unless Mr. Rosenthal wants to exercise his right to do so, but he's very kindly passing. So therefore, we'll move to the, all right. The process will be voting process will be as follows. First, we'll vote on the motion of the advisory committee to refer this matter to CTOS, and if that succeeds, that will conclude our deliberations under Article 17. If it fails, we will then vote on the main motion on the pink supplement. On the motion, there are 35 town meeting members who would like a recorded vote. There are. Okay, make sure your handheld device is on. It's the, if you've got your number in the window, your device is on. If it isn't, there's a button in the lower right-hand corner that you can press to turn it on. Most of the people who corrected their votes were correcting a failure to turn on their devices last town meeting. Okay, anytime. This is a motion to refer Article 17. Okay, press 1 if you are in favor of referring this matter to CTOS. Press 2 if you're opposed. Press 3 if you abstain.
Oh, I see. Right. Thank you.
Motion fails by a vote of 17 in favor, 179 opposed, and 5 abstentions. On the main motion on the pink supplement, those in favor, please raise your hands. Those opposed? That motion carries by a vote of 196 to 2. 195 to 3. Thank you, Mr. Friedman. The motion carries by a majority vote. Article 18. The motion under Article 18 is on page 8-10, moved by Ms. Jonas, seconded by Mr. Lynn Jones, that the town amend the dog bylaw. Mr. Franco for the Board of Selectmen, seconded by Mr. Green, moves to amend by adding the sentence on the second page of the yellow supplement, the last sentence in bold, reading, "This section is subject to the town's legal obligation to make reasonable accommodations for people with disabilities." So the amendment would add that language to on the second page of this vote. Ms. Jonas.
Hi, I'm Elisa Jonas, town meeting member from Precinct 16, speaking on behalf of a unanimous advisory committee recommending favorable action on warrant Article 18 as submitted by the Department of Public Works. The article's purpose is to increase compliance by dog owners with the town's Green Dog program and also with the town's leash laws. Under the provisions of the Green Dog program, dog owners who register the dogs and pay an annual fee may allow their dogs to run off leash in designated parks at designated times. The program was established a decade ago as a means to enable dog owners to provide their dogs with some opportunities to run freely, while also ensuring that the town's parks be protected from overuse and damage, and that non-dog owning residents would be able to use the parks without too much interference from dogs. Implementing this type of shared use program, it was hoped, would also improve compliance with the town's overall leash laws by providing designated times and places for dogs to run freely. And the program was a big success during the first years of its implementation. Dog owners were happy to have been provided with legally permitted off-leash opportunities, which in turn made them more willing to comply with the leash law elsewhere in town. The program was so successful, in fact, that it became a model for other communities in the state. Over the years, however, compliance with both the Green Dog program and the overall leash laws has declined. Many dog owners are not registering their dogs, they're allowing their dogs to be off leash in areas where this is not permitted, and many also are not cleaning up after their dogs. During the prior year, the police department logged 97 complaints, and the Department of Parks and Recreation has been receiving complaints on an almost daily basis. This warrant article proposes 2 amendments to improve compliance. The first amendment makes explicit in the dog control bylaw that dog owners must register their dogs if they wish to participate in the Green Dog program, and that continued participation requires compliance with the dog control bylaw. The second amendment will enable Parks and Recreation staff to enforce the bylaw. Currently, only the police have the authority to do so, but they've issued few citations, partly because they have other priorities, and partly because they generally are not stationed at the parks to observe the non-compliant behavior. However, the town has a park ranger who is located at the parks, and the budget we've just passed funds a second part-time ranger. This amendment would enable these rangers to enforce the bylaw. Shortly after the advisory committee voted on warrant Article 18, the Office of Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Relations proposed an additional amendment to include language that, quote, "This section is subject to the town's legal obligations to make reasonable accommodations for people with disabilities." During the advisory committee discussion, there was some puzzlement as to which element of the bylaw this amendment was intended to highlight for the purpose of making accommodations. since all of the town's bylaws are already subject to this requirement in any case. We learned that the amendment was intended solely as a general reminder of the applicability of state and federal accommodations requirements applying to all municipal laws. The advisory committee feels that it makes more sense to include a clear statement at the beginning of the town's bylaws and/or to include the proposed wording for each of the bylaws, but not to do so piecemeal. By having this wording included for some provisions and not for others could lead a reader to assume, incorrectly, that accommodations are not required for those provisions for which the wording is included, and also could make it appear that the town had planned to selectively comply with its legal obligations. To address this issue in a more comprehensive and less confusing manner,
You have 1 minute.
okay, Neil Gordon of the Advisory Committee is considering offering such an amendment for November's town meeting. The Advisory Committee differs from the Select Board with regard to this amendment, but unanimously recommends favorable action on warrant Article 18 as submitted by the Department of Public Works.
Thank you, Mr. Franco.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, and through you to the body. Ben Franco for unanimous Select Board. I'm going to dispense with the first half of my remarks because I think Ms. Jonas did a great job of explaining why this article was filed and what we're doing here tonight. I will simply say that the Select Board is in full support of taking steps to clarify and strengthen the Green Dog program and therefore recommends a vote of favorable action on the article. I'm going to turn now to the reason that the Select Board is offering a competing motion to what the Advisory Committee is putting forward. The Select Board's motion includes language which makes explicitly clear that the town has a legal obligation to make reasonable accommodations for people with disabilities, and that Article 8.6.7a can be modified if it presents an undue hardship for a dog owner with a disability. The board included the specific language in its motion in hopes that it will raise awareness about the availability of accommodations. And more broadly, the language in the Select Board's motion is a small, no-cost signal that Brookline is a welcoming community to persons of all abilities. Placing the language at issue in the relevant section of the bylaw is a better course of action than placing it at the front of the bylaws, as Ms. Jonas articulated, in the Select Board's opinion, because it better aligns with how the public interacts with the bylaws. Few members of the public learn about the applicable section of a bylaw or the applicable bylaw by starting at the beginning of the general bylaws and working their way through the document until they locate the relevant article. Nearly everyone I know identifies the relevant section of the bylaw, often via an internet search, and immediately navigates to it. It would therefore be more effective to include specific mention of the availability of reasonable accommodations in Article 8.6.7a itself. Against that context, the board recommends a vote of favorable action on its motion under Article 18.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Hi, Robert Lepson, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 9. Just had a question. Proud owner of a 2-year-old husky, proud participant of the Green Dog program for the last 2 years. In terms of the park ranger verifying whether or not dogs are properly registered with the town and with the Green Dog program, how will that happen? Will they randomly go up and talk to owners? Will they go up and look at dogs' collars? I just understand the process a little bit. There should be probable cause that somebody may not be registered. Just trying to understand.
Yes, go ahead.
Erin Galantine, Director of Parks and Open Space. Currently, the park rangers have an educational role. They do all of the registration for the program and regularly go to the parks, check in with folks. Have they licensed their dogs? Do they have, are they participating in the Green Dog program? So they're engaging right now in conversations. Sometimes they'll say, "Can you bring your dog over to show me that you have the current tag?"
Thank you. On the,
I've never seen that happen.
Mr. Nanian.
Sorry, I some years ago I was involved.
Who are
in,
you?
Scott Nanian, Precinct 10, town meeting member. And some years ago, I was involved in Somerville when I lived back there in getting the first off-leash dog area in Somerville opened. And I never recall this issue with making reasonable accommodations for people with disabilities coming up ever there. And I listened to both presenters, and I'm having trouble just visualizing what this sort of accommodation would be. Registering your dog does not seem like it's requires special accommodation, but maybe I'm just not seeing something. Could someone give me a good reason to vote for one version of this bill versus the other?
Well, the amendment applies to the entire bylaw, not just the section that we're adding.
Yeah,
but,
I did.
Mr. Franco, could you enlighten us on how the ADA would apply to this particular article?
I confess that I too can't envision exactly how it would apply, but I want to echo something that I said in my remarks, that I think even if we here can't imagine how it would apply, putting it in the bylaws ensures that anybody who, perhaps unlike us, can envision a reason why they need some reasonable accommodation, knows that it's available. And again, it's a signal to everybody that we are welcoming to persons of all abilities. And I think it's a win, even if nobody ever makes a request for a reasonable accommodation.
If I could just ask a follow-up. There's a green dog program brochure that we print out in town, right? And I believe that describes all the bylaws for compliance with the green dog program, and it used to be distributed on the fence at the park. Would that be a reasonable place to put this reminder?
I think it would be. I am of the position that spreading this information far and wide through a variety of different forms and a variety of different locations increases the likelihood that people will stumble upon it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jonas.
I just want to say the reason why,
hello.
I'm sorry, Elisa Jonas, town meeting member, precinct 16, and I just want to respond as well. The reason why the advisory committee did not want to support it just for this one particular bylaw, and that we wanted not necessarily just at the beginning of the bylaws, but for every single bylaw, is so it's not done piecemeal, because we had the same confusion Mr. Ananian did as to why is it included for this particular bylaw. So we think it should be included in all the bylaws to make it consistent and more sensical.
Thank you. On the Selectmen's amendment to the main motion, those in favor, please raise your hands. Those opposed? The chair is in doubt. We'll have an electronic vote simply to, this is not a recorded vote, so, simply to verify the vote. This is on Article 18, Select Board Amendment. And this is not a recorded vote. Motion carries by a vote of 116 in favor, 66 opposed, and 15 abstentions. On the main motion, on page 18-10 as amended, those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. Motion carries by majority vote. We turn now to Article 19. The motion under Article 19 is on page 19-11, all the way over to page 19-19 at the bottom. Moved by Mr. Gordon, seconded by Mr. Franco. It's an amendment of the tobacco control bylaw, about which you will hear in substantial detail, since we have a number of speakers. There is one correction that I need to make on page 19-16. The fourth line from the bottom of that page that begins effective such date, etc. Strike the word effective and strike the word section, which is the sixth word in that line. So it reads, on such permits, in the preceding line, sales permits on such date may continue to use such permits. Strike effective, strike section. And I call on Mr. Vitolo. Mr. Friedman, would you come forward?
Tommy Vitolo, town meeting member at large. I will be reading a statement written by the petitioner, Anthony Ishak, who can't be here tonight. Before that, I will add that I am working at the State House to keep all tobacco products, including electronic cigarettes, out of the hands of kids across the state. To the task at hand. Good evening, my name is Anthony Ishak, and I am a pharmacist from Precinct 1. I work as a pharmacist in internal medicine. Although we are able to do a lot to help people when they come within our walls, we often need to rely on solutions from our local communities. The warrant article before you is an example of one public health issue targeting children and youth that can be remedied by you, our local legislature, to help make healthcare providers, parents, and teachers more effective in promoting public health. We as a town have a historic low of 6.8% use among adult smokers. On the other hand, tobacco companies appear to target kids to create addicts and take a lifetime's worth of money. Flavoring clearly targets youth by utilizing candy and sweet-like flavoring to conceal the harsh flavor, which allows for deeper inhalations, prolonging nicotine exposure. This exposure is during a time when children are still growing and their brains and other organs are developing. Up to 90% of tobacco users start before the age of 18. A more local perspective shows that flavored products may be impacting Brookline youth, as our rate of illegal sales to minors is 25% higher than the state average. Anecdotally, the percentage of BHS students who use or know a classmate addicted to a tobacco product is 20 to 25%. As of 2015, the Healthy Brookline report showed a 4% usage rate of non-cigarette tobacco in middle school. The most likely method of obtaining tobacco is a local physical location, 74%, rather than the internet, 6%. Our local tobacco control violation rate of 10.3% gives proof that in real-life conditions, store employees will sell to kids. The 2009 FDA ban on flavored cigarettes led to an overall 6% reduction in the probability of use of any tobacco. The effect would have been stronger, but some users migrated to menthol or mint-flavored tobacco. Menthol is an equity issue. Menthol flavoring has targeted the LGBTQ and Black communities via billboards and other images. A 2017 study showed that not banning menthol mitigates the benefits of banning flavor products in youth. There was a study earlier this year in Ontario that showed the effect of a menthol ban led to a decreased cigarette sales overall, not just in menthol. This warrant article solves the problem with flavored products. Groups such as the World Health Organization, American Thoracic Society, American Heart Association, and American Academy of Pediatrics have recommended halting the use of flavored products, including specifically menthol. The American Cancer Society and Massachusetts Dental Society have submitted letters of support for our local warrant article. Even corporate America is getting involved, as evidenced by Walmart's change of policy earlier this month to stop selling fruit and dessert flavored electronic nicotine delivery systems. Costco, Target, and CVS, amongst others, don't sell at all. For legal age adults, the choice for non-flavored tobacco products, including plain tobacco for e-cig use, will still be available if they want to smoke. The removal of flavored products has historically encouraged smoking cessation. There is better evidence for FDA-approved medications and therapies which are backed by peer-reviewed guidelines. I want to close by highlighting that both flavored and menthol should be banned together. Anything less risks continuing the marginalization of vulnerable groups and reinforcing racial inequity in health. Let's join major medical societies and the NAACP and make us the 6th town in Massachusetts in protecting our most vulnerable citizens by banning flavored tobacco. A society's values can be best assessed on how it treats its most vulnerable. As a result of this principle, the facts stated earlier, and what you will hear from proponents, we ask that you vote favorable action on this warrant article.
Thank you, Mr. Friedman. You have 7 minutes.
Harry Friedman, Precinct 12, speaking in opposition to the warrant article. What does this warrant article do? It prohibits mint and menthol cigarettes and mint and menthol e-cigarette flavoring from being sold within the town of Brookline. Why does it do this? As I understand it, the proponents want to prevent children, minors, from getting hooked on cigarettes, regular or electronic. It also appears to want to discourage adults from buying these items. What does it not do? It does not prohibit children from buying cigarettes of any type because it's already illegal to sell tobacco products to minors in Brookline. It does not prohibit children from purchasing e-cigarettes because it's already illegal to sell these products to minors in Brookline. It does not prohibit the sale of other flavored tobacco products or other e-cigarette flavorings because it's already illegal to sell those within the town of Brookline. As I said, it only applies to mint and menthol cigarettes and mint and menthol e-cigarette flavorings. What will the proposed bylaw actually accomplish? I find it questionable that it will affect minors, as Brookline stores are already prohibited from selling to minors. The health department initiates stings, and stores that sell to minors risk fines and risk losing their tobacco licenses, in which case they won't be able to sell to anybody. Stings have found Brookline vendors to be compliant. Why then, you might ask, are the bathrooms of Brookline High filled with vaping teenagers? The answer is that the teens are getting their e-cigarettes elsewhere, most likely on the web, where there's no one to question a 14-year-old or ask for identification. How then will prohibiting Brookline stores from selling menthol e-cigarette flavorings prevent teens from obtaining these items? My answer is that it won't. Minors will continue to get them on the web. What about how this affects adults who are A, adults given by society the right to make bad choices, and B, capable of legally purchasing Cools or Newports or other menthol flavorings? These people will either switch to other brands of tobacco that will continue to be sold in Brookline, or they will leave Brookline and make their tobacco purchases elsewhere. What exactly are we accomplishing? Teens will continue to illegally purchase their tobacco and e-cigarette menthol products elsewhere, and adults will legally do the same. For adults, it will be as easy as a trip to Cleveland Circle, Allston, or any other part of Boston. However, as the proponents would argue, and I agree, tobacco use is bad, and many people feel the need to do something. I heard at advisory that Brookline will lead the way on this. And there's nothing wrong with leading the way or doing something even if it's not very effectual. However, in leading the way, one must be prepared to pay a price because there is no free lunch. We've seen this in the past. When we outlawed smoking in restaurants, some Brookline restaurants lost the business of smokers. However, the town's restaurants then became a draw for those who actually wanted to enjoy a meal without smelling other people's smoke. We paid a price, but the restaurants got additional business. When we gave up plastic shopping bags, who paid? Well, we all paid. Everyone who had ever carried his or her groceries out of the market in a plastic bag no longer could. The pain was shared by everyone. When we gave up styrofoam coffee cups, who paid? Well, frankly, Dunkin' Donuts paid. But they're a very rich corporation and they could afford to fund the switch to paper cups. So who will pay for this? Will the smokers pay? No. They'll continue to be able to easily get what they need, either over the web or in nearby communities. Will big tobacco pay? No. For them, either menthol smokers will switch to other brands or they'll go elsewhere to buy their cools. For big tobacco, only the location of the point of sale will change. Will those of us who don't smoke pay? No, it won't directly affect us. So who pays? 20 people pay. There are 20 individuals who have licenses to sell tobacco in the town of Brookline. I can not only tell you how many there are, I could give you their names, and you'll hear from some of them later tonight. Why will they pay? They will pay because Brookline is not an island. We are adjacent to Boston, and people will go there for their menthol cigarettes and flavorings. However, these store owners will not only lose the sale of the tobacco products, they'll lose the accompanying sales. The person who no longer goes to the market for the Newports is also not going for the newspaper, the quart of milk, the bag of chips that they also would have purchased, or the gasoline, or those awful beef jerky things sitting in the container near the register that look like they've been there since time immemorial. All of these sales will now go to Brookline stores. I get no pleasure by standing up here and looking like I'm defending tobacco. Smoking is a noxious habit, one in which I've never partaken, and I think people vaping, especially the kids, look ridiculous. In addition, I think there are things we can and should do. We should be banning these products, if at all, at the state level, to keep all our merchants on a level playing field. We should be teaching high schoolers about the harm in vaping nicotine, as well as the harm in smoking traditional cigarettes. If we're going to pass laws, I think it reasonable to demand that the law actually does what it says it's going to do.
1 minute.
And that the price paid isn't only paid by innocent parties. I think this warrant article fails in both regards. I ask you to vote no. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Franco. And Dr. Siegel, would you come forward and sit in the front row if you're not already there?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Ben Franco on behalf of the Board of Selectmen, or the Select Board, excuse me. Beginning in 2011 and continuing over successive town meetings, this body's predecessors have enacted a series of changes to the rules governing the sale of tobacco in Brookline. Among the changes that have been made are prohibition of sales of tobacco products in pharmacies and educational institutions, increasing the age necessary to purchase tobacco to 21, restriction of where and how tobacco products can be advertised, inclusion of e-cigarettes in Brookline's tobacco control bylaw, creation of a smoke-free buffer around the high school, and most recently, restriction of the sale of flavored tobacco products. Article 19 picks up where town meeting last left off when it restricted the sale of flavored tobacco by expanding the ban to include mint, menthol, and wintergreen flavored products. Passage of Article 19, as Mr. Friedman correctly pointed out, will result in the complete ban of the sale of all flavored tobacco products in town. The Select Board heard from the petitioners of Article 19 and others at its public hearing and in the weeks since that flavored tobacco products are marketed to specific groups of smokers, in particular youth and African Americans. The petitioners and others have also stated that tobacco is a deadly and extremely addictive drug and that previous bans on flavored tobacco incorrectly omitted products with mint, menthol, and wintergreen tastes. Finally, the board has received numerous letters from physicians and researchers, along with scientific articles and studies, in support of the intent of Article 19. I leave it to others to speak to this aspect of the debate. The board also heard with equal passion from local businesses who told the board that passage of Article 19 will impact their businesses financially. Flavored tobacco products make up a significant portion of the sales of the merchants who were present at the board's hearing on Article 19, and because of the availability of these products in Boston, Cambridge, and Newton, merchants fear the passage of Article 19 will shift customers' purchases to neighboring municipalities. The local retailers also noted their record, according to a CDC assessment, of not selling to underage patrons, something sure to be mentioned by the merchants and their supporters during tonight's debate. The board agrees with the petitioners of the article that tobacco is a product that at best causes long-term negative health impacts and at worst, death. The board also acknowledges that Brookline businesses will be impacted by the passage of Article 19, and it is likely that they will lose some business to retailers in neighboring cities and towns. And that no definitive evidence was presented that youth are today obtaining flavored tobacco products from Brookline retailers. The board believes that despite the negative impacts passage of Article 19 will have on merchants, it is in the town's, that's a lowercase t, long-term interest to promote the health and welfare of its residents by making tobacco products, including flavored tobacco products, harder to obtain. Town meeting has taken similar actions before, as evidenced by the recent changes I mentioned at the start of my remarks, and those recent actions fit squarely into a tradition of restricting the use of tobacco in Brookline that stretches back to at least 1982, when town meeting passed a bylaw requiring that at least 25% of the seats in restaurants with 40 or more seats be reserved for non-smokers. The Select Board recommends a vote of favorable action on Article 19 by a vote of 4-0-1.
Thank you, Dr. Siegel.
Thank you. I'm Dr. Michael Siegel, a physician and public health researcher in the Department of Community Health Sciences at the Boston University School of Public Health, and I'm speaking tonight at the request of Mr. Sunny Iqbal. I've been researching tobacco and fighting big tobacco for the past 30 years. My message tonight is simple. If you pass Article 19, it will be a great day. It will be a great day. But not for the people who you might think it will be a great day for. It won't be a great day for the thousands of former smokers in Brookline who rely upon flavored e-cigarettes to keep them away from smoking. It won't be a great day for the many smokers in Brookline for whom flavored e-cigarettes are now the #1 strategy for smoking cessation. It won't even be a great day for the youth of Brookline who will suddenly find it impossible to buy an electronic cigarette in the town, but easy to get their hands on a pack of Marlboro Kings. So who will it be a great day for? It will be a great day for Philip Morris, the country's #1 cigarette manufacturer. Why will it be a great day for Philip Morris? Right now, Philip Morris's Marlboro brand is Philip Morris's Marlboro brand is the #1 cause of preventable death in the nation. This is the #1 cause of preventable death right here that I'm holding in my hand. So how does Article 19 regulate this deadly cigarette brand? The answer, it doesn't. While the article takes virtually all cigarettes and all menthol cigarettes off the shelves, it contains a huge exemption that would allow Marlboro cigarettes, almost all of which are non-mentholated, to continue to be sold unfettered in the town. It completely removes Marlboro's 2 main sources of competition, electronic cigarettes and Newports. The executives of Philip Morris could not have dreamed of such a favorable regulation, even if they had written it themselves. Frankly, I doubt they even imagined that one day health officials would decide to eliminate almost all of Marlboro's competition by banning the competitive brands, but allowing Marlboro to remain on the shelves. While I applaud town meeting members for addressing the serious problem of youth vaping, this particular article, with its gaping Marlboro exception, is not the way to address the problem. Here's the message that passing Article 19 would send to other towns in the Commonwealth and the nation. We believe that it's appropriate for the government to allow certain brands of deadly cigarettes to be sold while prohibiting other equally addictive and deadly brands from being sold in those same stores. We believe that Marlboro cigarettes pose less of a risk to the public's health than Newport. We believe Marlboro cigarettes are far less dangerous for youth than Kool cigarettes. We believe that Pall Mall cigarettes should be banned completely, even though almost no youth has ever smoked this brand. And we believe that Marlboro cigarettes should stay on the market, even though they are the overwhelming #1 brand of cigarettes that is used and that is addicting Brookline youth to smoking. Here's what I, as a public health professional and lifetime crusader against big tobacco, believe. I believe, as does the CDC and probably every physician in this country, that no cigarette brand is safer than any other. And if you're going to take one of these off the market,
1 minute.
you should take all of them off. Article 19 is not even consistent with its own stated purpose. The purpose is to regulate the sale of and exposure to tobacco products, quote, known to be related to various and serious health conditions such as cancer. Well, I can tell you with 100% certainty that these Marlboro cigarettes, which will now be featured in every convenience store throughout the town if this article passes, do cause cancer. Proponents of Article 19 have warned that the epidemic of Juul use in Brookline schools is leading the town's youth to start smoking, and that this trend will continue. And the proponents of Article 19 seriously want to allow Marlboro packs to remain on the shelves when there are all these kids out there who will supposedly be transitioning to cigarette use?
Please conclude, Dr. Siegel.
I hope that you reject Article 19 in its current form, but come back next year with an article that restricts the sale of all cancer-causing tobacco products. I hope to come back next year and talk about how it will be a great day not for Philip Morris, but for the people of Brookline, smokers, former smokers, and youth alike, and it will set a model for the Commonwealth and the entire nation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. And Mr. O'Neill, would you come forward, please?
Kim Smith, Precinct 6, here for the Advisory Committee, which voted 12 to 4 to 4 in favor of this article. Article 19 seeks to amend the town's tobacco control bylaw to ban the sale of all flavored tobacco products, including mint, menthol, and wintergreen, which are not currently defined as flavors. The article does not ban the sale of unflavored tobacco or tobacco-flavored e-cigarettes. Proponents presented compelling epidemiologic data showing the alarming prevalence of tobacco use and nicotine addiction among minors. From 2017 to 2018, e-cigarette use rose 78% among high school students and 48% among middle school students. 1 in 5 of the former and 1 in 20 of the latter reported e-cigarette use in the last 30 days. In 2018, e-cigarette use was 25% among high school seniors in Massachusetts. Youth, young adults, and other new smokers use flavored products to ease into tobacco use. Brookline is not immune. E-cigarette use increases the likelihood of flavored products are a gateway to addiction for new users. E-cigarette use increases the likelihood that youth and young adults will smoke regular cigarettes by threefold. About 90% of adult smokers started as teens. Despite Brookline businesses' claims of 100% FDA compliance, local compliance checks have found that the rate of underage sales in Brookline is 25% higher than the state average. For adult smokers seeking to quit, FDA-approved cessation methods are nicotine patches, gum, and prescribed medications such as bupropion. e-cigarettes are not FDA approved for this purpose. Since Brookline has a long history of taking measures to protect the public, and in more recent years, it has enacted provisions to protect youth from exposure, as delineated by Mr. Franco. This article would further protect our youth by extending the current ban of flavored products to include mint, menthol, and wintergreen. So far, 5 Massachusetts municipalities have voted to expand their flavor restrictions. Others, including Boston, are considering doing so. There are 2 bills in the State House that would ban the sale of flavored tobacco statewide. There are 20 stores in Brookline with permits to sell any kind of tobacco product, including 1 adult-only retailer that is now allowed to sell flavored products. The AC acknowledged local business owners' concerns about losing profitable sales items. The ban would affect all stores, including the adult-only one. Implementation would be delayed. The amended bylaw, if approved by town meeting, would require the Attorney General's review, giving businesses in the town at least 3 months to plan. While there was concern about economic impact on local business, the majority of the AC felt that passing this article was important to protect public health and to prevent nicotine addiction. We were especially concerned about the risk flavored products pose to vulnerable youth. The
Yeah, 1 minute.
The AC voted 12 to 4 to 4 to recommend favorable action on the Select Board's motion, which is also the petitioner's motion. Please join me and my AC colleagues and vote favorable action. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. O'Neill.
Donnell O'Neill, Senior, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 4. I'm totally against this warrant article. Newport's in my hand. So, the reason I'm against this article, and I'm gonna work on vaping to slow down on my tobacco use, because I know next year, if this article comes back and they include both Marlboros and Newports, I'll vote in favor of the article. Right now, I feel this article is telling people like me that we're not welcomed in this town. That's what it feels like to me. I don't think if you're allowing one brand and not allowing another brand, and the brand that the majority of the people smoke is POC, people of color, I feel it's a negative impact. It's not a positive impact on the town. I'm not gonna say anything else, other than I'm against this article. That's it, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Toomey.
Good evening. My name is Maura Toomey. I'm a town meeting member from Precinct 8. I'm not a doctor, and I don't pretend to be one. As well as I'm a parent of a 23-year-old daughter, and I have twin 20-year-old sons. I'm speaking tonight on the enticement of flavored tobacco targeting the youth, namely e-cigarettes. As far as I'm concerned, I thought smoking was in our rearview mirror. Apparently it's not. And for the reasons I think we've already heard this evening, it's the availability, the alluring advertisements, the compelling flavors, and the belief that cigarettes are safer, e-cigarettes are safer than traditional cigarettes. In the interest of time, I'd like to read you a letter that I received from a constituent. And I think this is a really compelling letter. Dear town meeting members, whom I also consider friends, in confidence, she said I could read this letter just for the record. I'd like to share with you my experience. My 17-year-old son is addicted to nicotine. He is struggling to stop and admits that it is hard. He realizes that it is already affecting his health and his athletic performance. He has asthma, which has been under control for over 6 years. He had even stopped needing his daily maintenance medicine. His inhaler would expire before using it all. Now he needs a stronger medicine, and I'm refilling his rescue inhaler almost monthly. I'm also very concerned about the short time a few months that passed between when he started experimenting with nicotine and he started experimenting with marijuana. For some, marijuana is a gateway to other stronger drugs. For my son, I believe vaping nicotine was a gateway to vaping THC, then smoking pot and edibles. One could argue that maybe he would have picked up juuling even if it wasn't flavored, and that these restrictions wouldn't stop teen use. I argue that he wouldn't have touched them if they were flavored spinach, Brussels sprout, asparagus, or even tobacco. That's pretty funny. I attend adolescent addiction workshops for parents, and we work to identify and put barriers in place. We can't control their use. We can't be with them every minute of their day. We can make it difficult for them to use. Brookline can help me by making it harder for teens to get the fruity flavored pods they want. Maybe the extra drive to another town and then finding someone to buy for them in that town will be enough for a force that they will decide not to do that night. Every little bit helps. So that was a letter. Also, in addition, as a parent and as I stand here before you, I decided to educate myself since I didn't really know that much about e-cigarettes. I never used them, and I know that this, all of a sudden, there's the prevalence of e-cigarettes, so I did a few things. The first thing I did was I spoke to my 20-year-old sons, and they're very candid friends, and they told me a couple things I'd just like to share with you. They told me about cigarettes, specifically Juul. That's the brand, the name brand, and that's the most popular. They did tell me that they're able to go into the local smoke shops and use fake IDs, which a lot of kids have. They also did tell me about that they use Juuls because they think it's cool. It's the new cigarette. They said that smoking cigarettes is just not cool. So I think that's one of the big reasons they do it. Teens follow one another. Mango is the most popular flavor, followed by mint. And they did suggest that I also, if I had time, to speak to younger kids, specifically my sons are 20, 15-year-olds, where there's a huge prevalence. My second source to educate myself was I took a trip to a smoke shop on Beacon Street.
You have 1 minute.
Okay, and I said something along the lines, hi, I'm here to educate myself about vaping, and the gentleman was very helpful. He readily told me that the pods, I'm not really sure that I really understand all the terminology, but he did say they're nicotine, which is a drug. He actually said that to me. He talked about the tobacco and how it's formed, the tobacco into a liquid, and I, was trying to act like I was interested, but anyway. So I left the shop. I was feeling a little bit more educated, but also it was really shocking with all the flavors. They had raspberry, watermelon, cherry cheesecake, bubblegum, etc. So that's what I have to say, and I want to say thank you for listening, and please join me in voting responsibly to vote in favor of warrant Article 19. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gladstone, David Gladstone. And Dr. Winikoff, if you're not already in the front row, please come down and hi, Jonathan.
Good evening, David Gladstone. I'm a resident of Brookline, Precinct 16, and I'm here tonight to talk to you about Article 19. Town meeting members, Mr. Moderator, town staff, advisory committee, advisory members, select persons, citizens, and most importantly, Brookline business owners. If you're a Brookline business owner affected by this article, I'm going to ask you to stand right now. Thank you. So tonight we have about half the people in Brookline that actually make a living off of convenience, sales, and things like that. And they're here taking the time out of their day to be able to just talk about why it's such an important impact, why Article 19 isn't a great day, it's a bad day for them. And Dr. Siegel, I understand your health concern. You took a Hippocratic oath. I don't like smoking myself. I'm a former smoker. I have kids. And smoking is not a good thing. However, this solution is not a solution. If the town is serious about having a solution, we should look at funding for education of our children, not just doing a prohibition. Prohibition didn't work in the 30s. It didn't work with liquor, didn't work with cigarettes, didn't work with marijuana, and it won't work with this product. And oh, by the way, we're selling marijuana down at the dispensary and we're getting a convenience fee. How does that sort of identify with what we're doing with the cigarettes? On this hand, we're going to get revenue because we need it for the town, and on this hand, we don't get revenue, but we're going to ban it. So now I'll continue. So I'm not related to Scott Gladstone, but our kids went to school together. I'm the senior vice president of the chamber. I'm a member of the CCMA, a member of the select board committee for climate action. My full-time job is business development officer for Brookline Bank. I cover all the branches in Brookline, and I work with small business. I've been in banking for 18 years, and previous to that, I was in retail management for another 20. Jordan Marsh, Milton's Sports Authority, and DSW Shoe Warehouse. I hope everyone saw the tab of last week. The head article said more than just a store. You can't ask for this type of stuff. The timing was perfect, knowing that I was going to be addressing you guys. So it says, in a nutshell, I need to get to the right page, that basically convenience stores are under siege. It talked about one in particular. It talked about the one where you guys voted on Thursday on the Chestnut Hill Realty deal. That there's going to be a convenience store that's going to be impacted. At the end of the day, they said time and time out their business is getting tougher to run. It is not easy to be a small business owner. And by the way, Dr. Siegel, they're not Walmarts. Correction to Tommy Vitolo, he said that Brookline's rate for underage smokers is in excess of the state. I'm sorry to tell you and the person from advisory that I looked at the stats today in our health department, and Brookline's is 5%, the state's is 10%, and those are valid numbers from our health department. So basically, I spoke to every single business owner in Brookline to talk to them about what the impact was on their business. Not one single town meeting member went out and had any type of a conversation with these people to understand what the economic impact would be. When speaking to a few different people who actually was involved in this discussion, they said, we're not doing it on economics. We're not doing it on economic impact. We're doing it on sentiment. Well, that's great. Tell that to our business owners that we're voting these articles on sentiment. It doesn't fly. So basically, no TMMs went out and spoke to anyone. Education is the answer, not prohibition. Economic development had some cursory conversations with some of the business owners, but there really wasn't much done. The town, and unfortunately a lot of you town meeting members, see the stores as just a store. You don't see them as businesses impacting the fabric of Brookline. Basically, they're a source of revenue, and they're non-organized as town because greater than 80% of them live outside of town.
You're
and
at
they don't,
1 minute,
Thank
sir.
you. And they don't have anyone representing them. How much due diligence was done on economic study on the menthol and e-cigarettes versus how much time did we spend on the recreational marijuana issue? Each store or store will lose anywhere between $21,000 to $42,000 in total profit, which will be non-replaceable. This is a convenience factor, and I'm going to break it down now. So the lost cigarettes and e-cigarette sales will result in anywhere from $16,000 to $22,000 per door. The lost cross-sell opportunity of gasoline, soda, lottery, cake, eggs and wine, and beer will be another $5,000 to $20,000. That adds up to $21,000 to $42,000 per door on average. These estimates are based on the following. Most retailers make $1.50 on each pack of cigarettes. They make a profit of $6 to $10.
Conclude,
I'm concluding
Mr.
right now. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Mr. Gladstone, please conclude.
I'm concluding.
Thank you.
Concluding. I ask you tonight to vote no on this punitive article. This does not help Brookline business, and it doesn't help our youth. Banning this will not solve the problems. Education, with the town's help, is truly the answer, not prohibition. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Winikoff.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Winikoff, Brookline resident, 16 Stetson Street, father of 3 kids currently in the Brookline schools, pediatrician at Mass General Hospital, and professor of pediatrics at Harvard Medical School. I care for adolescents in my practice, including many who go to BHS. It used to be rare that I had any patients using tobacco products. Now every adolescent is either using a flavored e-cigarette or has friends who use them. Warrant Article 19 would have a profound benefit to the health of our children and fellow residents. Nothing works 100%, but each tobacco control measure Brookline Town Meeting takes can be a piece of the solution. Kids are most sensitive to what is advertised and for sale in local retail stores, even when neighboring towns take more time to act than us. For example, when Needham became the first town to raise the sales age to 21, they saw a 47% decrease in teen tobacco use in their high school. Kids who are not addicted will typically not travel to purchase tobacco product. Most don't even drive. Mint and menthol flavor were first added to cigarettes in the 1960s. This was done by the tobacco industry to increase smoking rates in Black and African American communities because they lagged behind the white smoking rate. According to a recent national study, the majority of people identifying as white want mint and menthol banned from tobacco products. However, in the same study, an even larger majority of people who identify as Black want mint and menthol banned. The tobacco industry was able to exempt mint and menthol flavoring in non-cigarette tobacco products through intense lobbying efforts. Warrant Article 19 corrects this loophole. The industry needs mint and menthol in their products to get the next generation hooked on tobacco. And I respectfully disagree with Dr. Siegel. Marlboro has a starter cigarette. It's menthol Marlboro. Look it up. Menthol Marlboro, just Google it. You'll see it right there. That is Marlboro's starter product. That is included in this ban. Over half of adolescent smokers 12 to 17-year-olds of age use menthol cigarettes. Menthol is extremely dangerous given its ability to act as an anesthetic, invoking deeper inhalation and increasing addiction. All major health groups support banning flavored tobacco, including mint and menthol. It is also supported by the Attorney General of Massachusetts, Maura Healey. Now, this is really important here. It goes to weighing. In Massachusetts, the rate of adolescent e-cigarette use is 9 times higher than adults. The main targets for Juul and other flavored tobacco are kids. If it sounds like they're targeting kids, it's because they are. They're targeting kids. It doesn't help them to cannibalize their own business of adult users. It doesn't help their profits. They have a fiduciary responsibility to grow, to expand their tobacco product business. That's why Philip Morris opposes this, not supports it if Dr. Siegel, what he says is true. Over 85% of users say that flavors are the reason they started using tobacco products. Adolescents who use e-cigarettes daily at some time in the past, of those who have used it sometime in the past, daily, 97% will still be using it currently. They are more addictive than even combusted tobacco cigarettes. Anything that addictive shouldn't be sold in retail in flavors that also appeal to kids. Just because a product is safer doesn't mean it's safe. E-cigarettes create an ultrafine aerosol that's inhaled deep into the lung. This causes inflammation in the lung. The use of e-cigarettes can cause anxiety, depression, mood disorders, asthma, impact brain development, may cause cancer. Why do we say may? Because we haven't had enough time yet to see them develop. They can alter the reward pathways in the brain to increase addiction to combusted tobacco. Adults who want to quit tobacco have many evidence-based options. The FDA-approved nicotine patch and gum in a recent New England Journal of Medicine article study showed that patch and gum was 2.5 times more effective than e-cigarettes at helping smokers get off all nicotine and tobacco products.
You have 1 minute.
With the passage of the warrant article, smokers would still be able to buy tobacco-flavored e-cigarettes. After all, smokers are already used to smoking traditional tobacco cigarettes. So luckily, though, kids have never smoked tobacco and find that flavor disgusting. Warrant Article 19 does not ban e-cigarettes. It restricts them in all other tobacco products so that they cannot have mint, menthol, and other flavors. Mass Department of Public Health has run compliance checks for Brookline retailers selling to adolescents over the past 4 years. Our failure rate is over 10%, and it is worse than the state average. It only takes a single store selling to known 18 or 19-year-old high school seniors to supply product for an entire high school. You'll hear from industry groups about FDA compliance checks. Those are done with 14-year-olds to a maximum age of 17-year-olds. The Mass DPH compliant checks are done with 18 to 20-year-olds, a better match for our Brookline age restrictions of 21 and under.
Please conclude.
Brookline retailers are no more compliant than those in other towns, and studies show that over 60% of kids get their product from a local retail establishment. So in conclusion, based on the Youth Risk Behavior Surveillance System data and Brookline's socioeconomic profile, approximately 100 Brookline kids per year become regular users of tobacco products, the majority initiating with flavored e-cigarettes. I urge you to vote yes on warrant 19.
Thank you, Mr. Audi. Elias Audi.
Good evening. My name is Elias Audi, and I own 2 mobile stations in Brookline. I've been in them for almost 40 years. I'm here tonight to state my reason for opposing warrant Article 19. First, I need you to know that if this warrant article passes and it becomes a law, it will cause a negative financial impact of approximately $35,000 of annual net profit to my business. I am willing to discuss this number with whoever is curious to know how it come about at any time after this meeting. By the way, I was never approached by anyone from the town, including town meeting members or presenters of the article regarding its impact on my business. For the benefit of doubts and for the sake of all involved, I assume that the lack of reaching out for talking to the businesses that will be impacted was unintentionally done and without any intentions of any type. I like to think that way. I do have a personal story I like to share with you tonight. Please listen to it carefully because it will teach us a lesson, I think. In my younger times, now I'm 70, so in my younger times, guess when? I was in my 30s. I was a very heavy smoker, 3 packs a day. Approximately at age 35, my older son, who was about 9 years old, suddenly started to show frustrations toward my smoking habits. All that was done due to school program and teaching, urging me to quit and not to smoke almost at all times. He kept this behavior for a few months until I seriously got convinced that he was correct and I should quit. Suddenly and quietly, without telling anyone, and that means including my wife, my kids, everyone, I completely quit. I cold turkey. A few weeks later, my wife, who smoked very lightly, noticed and also quit to help me continue. So as my mother, who lives with us, and was as heavy smoker as I was, also quit to help me out. As a result, my whole family became a non-smoking family. Until now, we still are non-smoking family. And that includes all my kids, my son-in-law, everyone that circles around my house. And that's thanks to my son, Omar. Omar was in the 3rd or 4th grade at that time. I think there's a lesson here to be learned, the power of education. I believe it's a great story. And that's why I think we do not need another law to be imposed on our community. The lesson is to start the process of educating our children in schools and at home very early in life and be consistent and patient. The question is, what you rather have? A non-enforceable ban that is ineffective for kids and punitive on businesses and people of 21 years and older, believing that having a ban of some sort that is ineffective, in addition to a set of locks and keys, and I know we all did it and we all still do it.
You have 1 minute,
to
sir.
Cabinets and closets, so they cannot easily obtain cigarettes, and then afterwards to discover that they are smoking cigarettes behind our backs by finding many ways to obtain them from outside Brookline, or trust that they are armed with enough information, knowledge, meaning education, in order for them to know how much harm can smoking cause their health. Please vote your conscience. Vote what is right for the future generation and also for the financial well-being of small business in Brookline, because we do not live in an island. Trust me that we are a better community if we guide our lives with education and knowledge. Education that will open doors to members of the community, the likes of the late Dr. Michael Shannon. I don't know if any of you know them. I think a lot of us know him. To come to schools as volunteer and provide the children the education they needed to know regarding the addiction to smoking, cigarettes, or others, so whether it's alcohol, other kind of marijuana, recreative marijuana, whatever. And
please conclude, Mr. Audi.
Sure. I'm almost done. And not having bunch of unnecessary laws, which I agree were presented with good intentions. And now I would say thank you, and please vote no, because I truly believe we don't need a law to prevent us from smoking. Thank you.
Dr. Schleff.
Good evening. My name is Tony Schloff. I'm the chair of the Public Health Advisory Council in Brookline. The council voted 4-1 on May 2nd in support of Article 19. I'm here speaking on behalf of that majority. I want to try and quickly do 4 things. One is explain why the majority voted as they did. Second, to say that this was not an easy call, and to talk about some of the caveats that the council wanted to call attention to town meeting about. Partly because many of you might have heard that we initially voted against and essentially changed our vote. And so I think the town meeting is entitled to know about why that happened. And also because the council, in voting in favor, did feel that the town meeting should consider some of the problems with the warrant article. And then finally, to sort of summarize, come full circle and say why ultimately we did come out in favor of it. So the basic reason we're in favor is that this measure would contribute to reducing youth access to flavored nicotine products, and we think that that would change the next generation's rates of addiction to tobacco. You've probably heard the Coalition for Responsible Retailers has characterized our change of heart on this as being about being intimidated. I don't agree with that characterization. But again, it's more important, I think, that we understand some of the details, some of which we've already spoken about. But in terms of concerns about the recommendation, one thing is that, as we've heard, advancing public health by banning the sale to adults of otherwise legal products should be done only when there is clear public health benefit. Such actions can be perceived as overreach and ultimately inhibit public health by limiting public acceptance. As we've already heard from one testimony, this action could burden long-term and committed smokers of menthol cigarettes who might not be able or willing to quit. These products are more frequently used by African American and low-income residents who may not be represented in the political process to the extent that they should, and some of them may have limited access to transportation and to the internet, making this a true burden. Third, new regulations require compliance checking, which requires funding. Brookline should fully fund tobacco control and be cautious about new regulations until it does so. The department relies on grant funding to do some of its compliance checking at this time. Unlike Boston or Cambridge, we lack any in-town resources to do epidemiologic studies, so there's a lot of data we don't have. As a result, there's no specific data available to us regarding African American, LGBTQ, and low-income resident smoking rates. We also don't have evidence about Brookline youth, where they get their tobacco from. And I think it's important to note, for that reason, we won't actually be able to know whether this policy works or not, because we won't be able to monitor how it's changing youth access. All right. Despite those caveats, what sort of changed our minds and what are some of the relevant things I think town meeting should consider. You've heard about the FDA and the state DPH compliance checks. As we became aware of the DPH compliance checks, we realized that our retailers are doing well, but not perfectly. CRR's own national data actually surprised me, and I think most of the members of the advisory, and that it suggested that teens are not getting their cigarette products from the internet, but are actually borrowing it, bumming it, buying it from adults who have bought it locally. And so the ultimate source is retail stores. And this is important because it's also not about shaming the retail owners. Even when they do their best not to sell it to youth, youth are getting it in a secondary way. And so that access of convenience is something that we want to put an end to. We also got a clearer picture over time of the regional and state and ultimately national goal of getting rid of flavored tobacco products. It really is the current battle in the tobacco wars. If Brookline does not vote for this, we will perhaps soon be an island that provides access. And I think it's more and more likely that more towns, the state, and ultimately the FDA will take action, and local actions such as Brookline's might actually speed that process up. And then the harm reduction
30 seconds.
Okay, of e-cigarettes are important, but again, I think we were persuaded by the presence of tobacco-flavored e-cigarettes. For those who choose this, again, not FDA-approved form of harm reduction, they still have access. So again, I hope I haven't confused people by presenting a fairly mixed picture. You have a very, very difficult decision ahead of you, but again, ultimately, the Advisory Council came out in favor of this article. Thank you.
Thank you. Lily Hong.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name's Lily Hong, and me and my family own Village Convenience down the village. I also want to say that our family's been here for about 20 years, and Brookline has a very special place in my heart because, you know, this is the first place that my whole family immigrated to. So about 6 years ago, we wanted to open a store, in which we did. And it's been a roller coaster, ups and downs, but exhilarating, and we're passionate. We love what we're doing. We love seeing our customers every day, you know, getting up early, seeing the early risers get newspaper, you know, juice. And we also sell cigarettes. And I want to say this whole process of Article 19 has kind of hurt us a little bit, not because of the profits. It's just that, you know, when we first moved here, we felt very welcomed, and this is a multicultural community. Brookline has access to, because where we're located, we have access to Boston, Austin, everything, and we incorporate all of the culture of everybody here. So this process has kind of made me feel that the store owners aren't really welcome here. You know, I feel like I think I can say on behalf of a lot of the store owners that are going to be hurt by this article, many of us were not even approached by any of the committees about this article. This one, I had to find out from somebody, one of the store owners handed something to me, and I was like, what is this? So it almost feels like there was absolutely no concern on the mental or financial well-being at all. That's just how I feel. It feels like there's a little bit of blame assigned to us, as if we are doing something wrong and we're somehow intentionally trying to sell to Brookline kids, and that's morally wrong, and I don't think anybody here wants to sell those things to kids that are not intended for kids. You know, I just don't feel, I feel like there's a tension. I feel like somehow this is all up to us, like we're the problem. But we understand, and I personally understand, there is an epidemic of kids, especially Juul, because it's popular and it's a fad. And I went to Brookline High myself many, many years ago, and you know, I did see smoking, and I remember e-cigarettes weren't popular back then. I don't even think they were available back then. But but I remember that, you know, Brookline High School had an open campus here because we trust and we trust our kids, and we hold responsibility over our kids. And just because, you know, there's some products out there somewhere exist, doesn't mean that we're immediately or just brainlessly we have to go get it. And that's, I mean, I know that earlier something was mentioned that all it takes is one store owner to kind of, you know, sell one product to a kid. But I also want to say that all it takes is one friend, one relative, and maybe one sibling who could share to all the kids or your neighbors. All it takes is one. So I just feel like I'll get to the reason why I post this article, but I just want to get that out there. I just feel like the process in which we were definitely not, we did not feel included in this at all. We're like fighting for our livelihoods here. Yep.
Yes,
So
you have one more minute.
Okay. So I just want to say to those that are thinking that they oppose this article, you know, I want to tell you that you're doing this because you know that smoking is already expensive. Massachusetts has one of the highest tobacco taxes in the nation. 40 excise tax on wholesale tobacco, 210 excise tax on wholesale smokeless tobacco, the menthol smokeless will also be affected by this ban. So smokers are naturally slowing down and quitting due to how expensive it is. It is ridiculously high. You know, by banning the sale of tobacco will only make it more desirable. You know that one can still be an advocate for healthy lifestyles while respecting the adult's choices. Healthy lifestyles doesn't mean banning the bad things. It means encouraging the good things. You know that we should embrace people of all walks of life and helping those by educating, encouraging, and not pushing them away or excluding them or judging them by the choices they make. People who smoke here still belong in Brookline. They do not need to feel like they should be kept out.
Please
If
conclude.
you're in favor of this
Ms.
article,
Hong,
yes.
Ms. Hong, please conclude.
Okay, I will conclude, but please don't do it for the wrong reasons because it sounds good and feels good in another town doing this, so should we. This is the exact reason why kids are doing this, because it's popular and it's a fad. You're telling the citizens of town which products is okay to buy and which isn't. So,
Whoa.
I just ask you guys to, you know, think critically about this issue. I know some of you have made up your mind, but at the end of the day, all the store owners have nothing to gain from
Ms.
this.
Hong, you
Yes.
must conclude.
We have nothing to gain from this. If we win,
No, I don't
it's not
think
a
you-
win because the problem will still exist. The
Perhaps
actual
you didn't
impact.
understand me.
Okay, the actual
Please
impact is uncertain.
take your seat. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
It's working. Dr. Miriam Ashkenazi, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 13. I also have a master's in public health and a master's in public administration. I think since we're talking about the economic costs related to this warrant article, it's important to understand that the economic coin has another side. And it is, what are the economic costs associated with smoking? According to the Center for Disease Control, based on a recent report by the Department of Health and Human Services, the cost of smoking in the United States alone is $300 billion a year. How much does that cost Brookline? Well, we are 1% of Massachusetts, which is 1%. Brookline is 1% of Massachusetts, which is 1% of the United States. So thank you, Tommy Vitolo. The math comes out to $30 million a year. That is the true economic cost of smoking. So I think it's fair to talk about economic costs as we talk about public health programs, but I think we have to think about the other side of that. And I don't really want, personally, to spend that kind of money on the health of my community if it isn't going to better the health of my community.
Thank you, Mr. Fry.
Ernie Fry, Precinct 7. The comments that I have here relate not only to this warrant article, but to others that I've heard last session and even in this session.
Well,
It seems that the person...
Mr. Fry, confine your remarks to the article before us, if you please.
I feel that the people that are proposing this article, we're very reluctant to get in touch with people who might have opposed it. And I think that that's a failure of our system here, and I implore the future warrant articles to be prepared accordingly.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Vina, and I'm from Precinct 4. So I myself have 2 children. One is 12, and unfortunately has tried e-cigarette before. It wasn't a menthol flavor. It was a friend that gave him Fruity Pebbles. So my question is, the problem is the flavors that are cereals and targeting children, Fruity Pebbles, Fruit Loops. I understand that we are addressing menthol. I don't know that many children that see menthol and see red light, I want to try menthol. It's more of the Cocoa Puffs, Fruity Pebbles. What are we doing for those type of targeted cereal flavored cigarettes? I don't understand, if we're trying to prevent children and youth from trying these cigarettes, why aren't we going after those type of flavors?
Well, I thought that subject was exhaustively covered by the speakers, and
I thought that we had menthol, that we were addressing menthol, and menthol was off the list. So is it all flavors? Because I noticed that it was.
Yes.
They kept on saying menthol.
Yes.
So all flavors of the Juul cigarettes.
yes.
Okay.
Ms. Vanderzeel?
Mr. Moderator, Cornelia Vanderzeel, Town Meeting Member from Precinct 15. And also, I'm supposed to give the position of the Commission for Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Relations. Can I do that now? Or would you like to continue with questions?
Well, I had a number of speakers before we got to you, so be patient, and we may or may not get to you, depending upon, in essence, the patience of town meeting, which seems to be extraordinarily patient this evening. Okay, the question has been called. Is there a second?
Recorded vote, please.
Okay.
Request a recorded vote. Kate Silbaugh, Precinct.
Well, let's see if the debate's been closed first. You see I have the following people signed up to speak in favor of this article: Ms. Silbaugh, Ms. Stamfer, Ms. Daly, Mr. Gordon, Mr. Spritz, Ms. Vanderzeel, and Ms. Chania Solkut. I have one person, Adam Ponte, who is an attorney for one of the owners of an affected business, to speak against. And on the motion for the question, those in favor of closing debate, please raise your hands. Those opposed, that motion carries by a 2/3 vote. We'll have, are there 35 people who want an electronic vote on the, yes, there are. This is Article 19, main motion. This is the motion that starts on page 19-11 over to page 19-19. And press 1 if you are in favor of this motion. Press 2 if you're opposed, and 3 if you abstain. Make sure your devices are operating. Motion carries by a vote of 174 in favor, 20 opposed, and 13 abstentions. Thank you, those of you who participated in that debate. I need to announce a couple of changes on the electronic votes at the last session. The main motion under Article 13, motion carried by a vote of 208 in favor, 4 opposed, and 12 abstentions. The main motion under Article 16, relating to the village parking benefit district, 124 in favor, 85 opposed, and 10 abstentions. We turn now to Article 21. The motion under Article 21 is found on page 21-3 over the top of page 21-4, that the town amend the marijuana bylaw in the manner set forth in the motion. It's moved by Ms. Silbaugh, seconded by Mr. Franco. Ms. Silbaugh.
Kate Silbaugh, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 1, and co-petitioner of Warrant Article 21. This warrant article clarifies to applicants who hope to open a recreational cannabis establishment in Brookline that the Select Board does have discretion to begin evaluating a site proposal prior to executing a host community agreement. This proposed revision does not change the underlying substantive general bylaw or zoning bylaw. It just clarifies to applicants the town's authority to begin its investigation of suitability and legality at the earliest stage in the process, if the town wants to do so in a given case where red flags over legal compliance are evident at the start. This warrant article does not, however, require any study by the Select Board or by anyone else. The warrant article would matter under circumstances where a proposed operator presses for an HCA, though the town has reason to think on its face that it isn't going to make it to the end and that it will hit a hard stop somewhere down the line. It also explicitly preserves the real meat of the town scrutiny, which is later on in our process. Updating this process in light of our limited experiences in Massachusetts will provide the town with the discretion to obtain the necessary information and data from the operator to determine if the site proposed by an applicant can be operated without violating town bylaws prior to entering into a host community agreement. If the town had some reason to believe, for example, that a site is within 500 feet of a school, Warrant Article 21 allows the town to ask for a survey before signing an HCA. If an applicant has a felony conviction or a history of revoked liquor licenses, either of which would eventually disqualify them under state law and local law, the Select Board can ask for additional information about those matters to determine whether they're likely to be resolved. The town can ask under this warrant article, but it's not required to. In December 2018, Maderi Inc., a cannabis retailing hopeful, sued the City of Salem in Essex Superior Court for failure to enter into a host community agreement based on its expectation of a right to an agreement. In a pretrial ruling, the Superior Court determined that the Massachusetts cannabis statute requires an applicant to have executed an HCA with a municipality, but does not require a municipality to execute an HCA with an applicant. Rather, the court found that the statute contemplates a negotiation, not a ministerial act, as the applicant had alleged. The town of Salem, however, had explicitly reserved its discretion to refrain from entering into a host community agreement with any given applicant, and also, in its case, to assess favorability characteristics in selecting among applicants for HCAs. This warrant article provides similar clarity about the town's authority. This warrant article does not require any study. It clarifies that the town has discretion to request this kind of information if a case arises where it would make sense. Delaying all assessment of feasibility to the licensing phase is unfair to the proposed cannabis operator and may prevent other applicants from coming forward nearby or across the town with more suitable applications during the lengthy state processes. HCAs are still relevant, despite our having our 4 applicants, because the existing applicants on Comm Ave and in Coolidge Corner have not yet been subject to scrutiny by the town. That's still coming, and it may cause
any of them not to succeed to the licensing stage. Also, these businesses do fail at a relatively high rate in other states.
You
And
have 1
so these
minute.
questions will continue to arise. Please join the advisory committee and the select board in voting favorable action on warrant Article 21.
Thank you, Mr. Franco.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Ben Franco for unanimous Select Board. Article 21 proposes to change the bylaws that govern the process by which marijuana establishments' applications to operate in Brookline are evaluated. To level set our conversation, applications to operate a marijuana establishment in Brookline are evaluated in several phases by town and state government. Describing the details of the process would keep us here until Thursday night. So against that context, I offered a simplified version of the process. A retailer approaches the town and expresses an interest in opening an establishment. The retailer holds at least one public meeting with the community at which they discuss their proposed establishment and answer the community's questions. The retailer then returns to the select board and asks the town to enter into a host community agreement, an HCA. With that HCA in hand, the establishment's proprietor then goes to the state's Cannabis Control Commission, or the CCC, and applies for a state license to operate. With the completed CCC application in hand, the purveyor then comes back to the town and meets with employees of the planning department and possibly members of various other town departments to undergo preliminary site plan review to ensure compliance with the town's zoning bylaws and to vet the application. The next step, and only after the application has been vetted during the preliminary site plan review process, is for the establishment to formally apply to the planning department for site plan review. After completion of site plan review and after the Zoning Board of Appeals has granted zoning relief, relief is required because a special permit is required to open any marijuana establishment in town under the zoning bylaw. The merchant must apply to the select board and undergo the typical licensing process. Following the town's issuance of a Brookline license, the merchant must receive a final approval from the CCC. To be clear, an application can be halted at any of these stages for innumerable reasons. Advancement and completion of the process is not guaranteed. My intention is to make clear that today, establishments must go through a multi-step process that includes review by town and state officials, which brings us to Article 21. The article before the body proposes to amend Section 8.37.5, subsection A2 of the town's bylaw in order to clarify that the town, through the select board, need not wait until the later stages of the review process to obtain information and data to help determine if a proposed establishment can operate in compliance with the town's zoning and general bylaws. The article makes clear that the town may request information prior to entering into an HCA with a proposed retailer, as opposed to having to wait until the later stages of the review process. The practical impact of the changes would be to make clear that the select board is able to do an in-depth review of an applicant at the HCA stage and, if appropriate, set conditions on the proposed establishment's operations as part of the HCA. Article 21 was filed in response to the town's recent experience citing recreational marijuana establishments, and particularly an application for a recreational marijuana retailer on Lower Beacon Street. While the select board did not sign a host community agreement with that applicant, the town's evaluation of the application in question made clear to the petitioners that the need for clarification about what the select board and the town are able to do at the HCA stage of the process. The board appreciates the clarity Article 21 provides, and that the language provides the board with discretion about whether and data information from an applicant is necessary to allow the town to make a preliminary assessment regarding the proposed establishment compliance with state and town bylaws. The board recommends a vote of favorable action.
Mr. Selwyn, would you like to add anything to the many things that have already been said?
I think everything of any importance on this subject has been said, except to report that the advisory committee, by a vote of 20-0 to 2 abstentions, recommends favorable action.
Mr. Wyszynski? Passes. On the motion on page 21-3, those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Motion carries unanimously. And raise your hands if you're abstaining. or one abstention. Now, there is no way we will complete the warrant this evening unless you want to stay here until about 1:30 in the morning. So I suspect there isn't a great deal of sentiment for that. Let me tell you that the next 5 articles are essentially uncontested. That is, there are speakers who have signed up in support, and with only one exception, no one has signed up in opposition. So I would like to aim to get through Article 26 this evening, which will give us an adequate amount of time to debate Article 27, which is a difficult one. So that will take some cooperation on your part, and one way you can cooperate is not to repeat what prior speakers have already said, and that's difficult to do when you have prepared speeches, but do your best. Article 22, the motion under Article 22 is at the bottom of page 22-3 over to 22-6, moved by, I'm sorry, 22-5 to 6, moved by Mr. Carroll, seconded by Ms. Granoff. Mr. Carroll. It's a resolution calling for a study of pedestrian-friendly street lighting.
Hi, I'm Frank Carroll, Precinct 10. One of North Brookline's major attractions is its walkability. This article is about walkability of our sidewalks after dark. Good lighting is needed to assure that sidewalks and street crossings are safe for pedestrians after dark. The proposal stems from a Brookline CAN project to address complaints about inadequate street lighting, sidewalk lighting. Brookline CAN volunteers surveyed sidewalk lighting conditions in much of North Brookline in the early fall of 2015 and again in 2016. In conducting the project, the volunteers had extensive communication with DPW, both about street lights and about street tree foliage. Brookline relies primarily on highway lighting to illuminate both streets and sidewalks. With highway lighting, fixtures are attached to utility poles that are tall and that are set far apart. Light fixtures are positioned so that they are, as much as possible, over the streets. The fixtures are designed to cast lights a long distance. The strategy works best where there are no street trees, and especially mature street trees. Mature street trees severely compromise the effectiveness of highway lighting. When street lights are above the canopies of mature trees, the light often does not penetrate to the sidewalk below. The lack of light on sidewalks below street trees is particularly troublesome for pedestrians when tree roots have caused the sidewalks to heave. Pedestrian-friendly lighting, in contrast, makes it possible to work around the challenges presented by mature street trees. Lighting is pedestrian-friendly when poles are lower, closer together, and positioned to assure that sidewalks are illuminated. Pedestrian-friendly lighting is also below the street tree canopy. On a limited scale, we already have pedestrian street lighting. So far, the pedestrian-friendly lighting is limited to commercial areas: Brookline Village, St. Mary's, Coolidge Corner, Washington Square, and JFK Crossing. They all have pedestrian-friendly street lighting to a certain extent. Particularly impressive is the new pedestrian-friendly lighting that we now have for all of Harvard Street, extending from Brookline Village to the Alston border. The Harvard Street lighting north of Brookline Village is particularly notable because of the soft lighting technology that is used. The soft lighting provides effective illumination without the glare produced by bright LED street lights. Article 22 calls for appointment of a committee to consider expanded pedestrian-friendly street lighting. Currently, we have less than 2 miles of pedestrian-friendly street lighting. Overall, we have over 100 miles of streets. The cost of purchasing, installing, and maintaining new pedestrian lighting will be substantial. The committee will be responsible for identifying the locations where the new lighting is most likely to make a contribution that justifies the cost. My hope is that the plan produced by the committee will be adopted and gradually implemented. I look forward to a time when Brookline will be more hospitable to pedestrians after dark. A major reason for introducing this proposal was to assess public interest in the topic. The process leading up to town meeting indicates strong support. The groups recommending favorable action include the Pedestrian Advisory Committee, the Transportation Board, the Advisory Committee, the Select Board, the Green Caucus, and Brookline PACs.
1 minute.
I hope that town meeting will confirm that interest by voting favorable action.
Thank you, Ms. Granoff.
Susan Granoff, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 7, speaking for a unanimous advisory committee in recommending favorable action on warrant Article 22. Brookline is renowned for being a walkable community. Many of our residents, especially those living in North Brookline, regularly walk after dark to restaurants, stores, the movie theater, or to evening events at Town Hall, the town's schools and libraries, the senior center, the teen center, and numerous places of worship. Extending pedestrian-friendly lighting would make Brookline a safer community for all ages, since anyone walking on an inadequately lit sidewalk is in danger of falling, and anyone walking in a poorly lit crosswalk is in danger of being hit by a motor vehicle. But extending pedestrian-friendly lighting would be a special benefit to our older residents. Many seniors typically have poorer night vision than do younger residents, and poorly lit sidewalks appear even darker to them. Additionally, many seniors fear the consequences of falling on a sidewalk, which for some seniors can result in serious and even fatal injuries. Poorly lit sidewalks also exacerbate the problem of social isolation among seniors, because rather than walking in poorly lit areas, many seniors will simply choose not to leave their homes at all after dark. In conclusion, our town has demonstrated that it knows how to provide pedestrian-friendly lighting because it has already installed several different types of such lighting along some of Brookline's main sidewalks. Now what is needed is for a committee to be created to study to what extent these types of pedestrian-friendly lighting should be expanded to additional Brookline sidewalks, and the cost, complexities, and options for doing so, and to develop a plan for such expansion. Our town has a public safety obligation to do so. For all of these reasons, the advisory committee, by a unanimous vote of 17 to 0, urges favorable action on warrant Article 22.
Thank you, Ms. Hamilton.
Heather Hamilton for a unanimous select board. The board is supportive of this resolution because pedestrian-friendly sidewalks are already a goal of the Complete Streets program. The board feels that a study will allow the town to determine which sidewalks are prudent to address and will help prioritize implementation of a plan when funds become available. We urge favorable action on the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Richmond.
Clint Richmond, Precinct 6. I just wanted to add that I'm supporting this, as I think the town meeting will, but in addition to being pedestrian-friendly, I'd like to call it sleep-friendly. The issue of light trespass, especially from our street lights, is an ongoing issue. I understand it'll be expensive to address, but I welcome the opportunity to lower the lighting so that it's not going into our bedrooms. Thank you.
Thank you. On the motion on page 22-5 over to 22-6, resolution. Those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Motion carries unanimously. Article 23, The main motion under Article 23 is on the yellow supplement, pages 2 through 4, moved by Ms. Gray, seconded by Ms. Hamilton. It's a resolution calling for the electrification of the town's motorized fleet. Ms. Gray. Mr. Gray, I'm sorry. That's twice that I've done that to you. I apologize.
I'll take 5 minutes for Mrs. Gray and 5 minutes for Mr. Gray. I'm Precinct 10, co-sponsor of this town fleet electrification resolution. Now, walking through Brookline 100 years ago, you would have seen a greater percentage of electric vehicles, or EVs, than you do now. And it's too bad they went away temporarily, because even at the time, they were quieter, less polluting of the local environment, and easier to maintain than fossil fuel mobiles. Today's EVs can drive 250 miles on the energy equivalent of 2 gallons of gasoline. Because of this incredible efficiency in converting stored energy into motion, swapping out even a relatively efficient hybrid gasoline vehicle for a fully electric vehicle results in an immediate reduction in carbon dioxide emissions per mile of at least 60%. As our electrical grid continues to be powered by greater and greater percentages of renewable power, and as the town's own adoption of renewable energy is accelerated even further by David Lescoyer's Warrant Article 24, up next, that same electric vehicle purchased today will get greener every single year. And it could eventually drive its first mile with 0 additional emissions beyond those required for its manufacture. That's why the key to stopping climate change is to electrify everything and to clean up the grid. Electrify everything when it's time to replace it anyway, including hot water heaters, dryers, ovens, stoves, heating systems, and yes, automobiles. And clean up the grid so that all electricity is clean. It's fun to electrify everything together. Several of you took test drives with me in an electric vehicle, and Harry Friedman almost got me killed. Just kidding, he's an excellent driver. I urge you all to consider an electric vehicle for your next personal vehicle purchase. It's more practical than you may appreciate, especially now that thanks to the hard work of town staff members Maria Morelli and Todd Kirain, we will in a matter of months have 13 publicly accessible EV chargers along Beacon Street, including fast chargers in St. Mary's, Coolidge Corner, and Washington Square that can charge a car in half an hour while you shop, chat, or like me, just lose yourself in your phone. For many of you, switching to an EV will be the single biggest practical thing that you can do to reduce your own personal emissions. Now, the town is in a position to electrify its own fleet of vehicles, about 300 of them. This plan will require all new vehicles purchased by the town to be as electric as is practical, with the details of implementation left to supportive and highly capable staff. This means we can immediately begin to go all electric with passenger cars. We can probably immediately go partially electric, like plug-in hybrid, with light-duty trucks and vans. And we should be able to buy all electric school buses and garbage trucks within a few years. EVs are cost-effective, even when they cost more to purchase up front, as shown in this New York City fleet data. And this overall cost effectiveness is driven by the dramatically lower maintenance costs of electric vehicles. An electric motor requires 0 maintenance, and literally the only thing on a Chevrolet Bolt EV maintenance schedule for the first 150,000 miles is tire rotation and air cabin filter replacement. This is why car dealerships don't want to sell you one. That being said, the town may even save money from the get-go on some EV purchases. So right now, a Nissan Leaf EV, after available state incentives for the town, is cheaper to buy than a Toyota Prius. Now, many individuals help translate this need to electrify our fleet into a practical policy proposal. My co-sponsor on this, Select Board member Heather Hamilton, and the town chief procurement officer, David Giannakakis, taught me that if it's not on state contract, it can't be purchased. Sustainability coordinator Zoe Lynn, assistant town administrator Justin Casanova Davis, and many other town staff are helping with implementation. In fact, a dozen additional staff spent at least an hour helping me with this warrant article. And Linda Olson-Pelkey and Select Board Member Nancy Heller, along with Werner Lowy and Scott Ananian, helped lay the groundwork from an important EV subcommittee. So finally, I just want to point out that the City of Newton has been particularly smart to quickly and inexpensively acquire a large number of EVs through a very attractive lease-to-own option that I hope the town staff will consider seriously. And finally, I'm also grateful for the support of the Select Board Climate Action Committee, the School Committee, PACs, as well as the unanimous support of the Select Board, the Advisory Committee, Climate Action Brookline, and the Green Caucus. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher and Mr. Leckley. I'll get to your questions, so you might as well sit down in the meantime.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
And I want to point out that this is a resolution. This is not mandatory. The town meeting cannot require that the sense of this resolution be carried out, but it's certainly will be persuasive if town meeting votes overwhelmingly in favor of it. Ms. Lodish?
Thank you very much. I did have a talk prepared, but I think that we
Well,
have over...
who are you?
Oh, my name's Pam Lodish, Precinct 14. And
I thought so.
Many of my points were already raised by Jesse. And in the interest of time, and considering that we have an overwhelming support from the advisory committee voted 20 to 0, and we don't want to be here all night, I can go on, but I can just give you that as a statement and sit down.
Thank you. Ms. Hamilton? That was an excellent presentation, Ms. Lodish.
Heather Hamilton for a unanimous Select Board. I should also disclose that I am a co-petitioner on this warrant article. The intention of this warrant article was to get us moving in the direction of all electric vehicles for our municipal fleet. From 2012 to 2016, I was the person in charge of procurement, disposal, and assignment of the entire fleet for the Highway Division of the Massachusetts Department of Transportation. During that period, we increased our percentage of alternative fueled vehicles to 26% of the overall fleet, with policies like the one here before you tonight. Although the language has changed, the intention is still captured in this warrant article. Staff have consulted and made for a better outcome. We need a vehicle policy that will take time. In the short term, there will be pilots in order for staff to feel comfortable with what is commercially available and, of course, under state contract. We urge favorable action on the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lowy. And Ms. Stamford, would you please come forward?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'm Werner Lowy, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 13, and I'm also co-chair with Nancy Heller of the Select Board's Climate Action Committee. This warrant article is a very important step forward. Almost 20 years ago, Brookline was one of the first towns in Massachusetts to start to green its fleet. That is, in the year 2000, here in town meeting, because of a vote in town meeting, we began to buy Priuses, and we've been buying fuel-efficient vehicles ever since. Now, some people think of 20 years as a generation, and if that's true, well, then certainly what we're doing here tonight is this is a warrant article for the next generation of motor vehicles. And also, as people have pointed out, it's an excellent example of town staff and climate advocates working together collaboratively to move the ball forward. The Select Board's Climate Action Committee has endorsed this warrant article, but it's done it with a reminder to all of us. As important as it is to change from fossil fuels to renewables, it's also important to think about our behavior and about our systems. We all know well that when we think about waste, the mantra isn't just recycle, recycle, recycle. It's reduce, reuse, recycle. And what that means for the town fleet, and town staff have assured us that they're committed to this as well, is that we also need to look for ways to use motor vehicles less and to use them more efficiently. So I urge you to vote favorable action on warrant Article 23.
Mr. Leckler. I've called Mr. Leckler, and then we'll have a question for Mr. Fisher, and then I'll entertain that motion.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'm Ed Leckler from Precinct 8, and I'd like to follow up on something that Mr. Gray mentioned. That is to help transform its vehicles to a fleet that uses less fossil fuels. Newton is pursuing a lease-to-own strategy. And I'd like to ask if we in Brookline couldn't pursue, or at least explore, the logic and feasibility of following Newton's lease-to-own strategy.
Mr. Kleckner?
Hi, good evening. Mel Kleckner, Town Administrator. We'd certainly be willing to look at anything. Like all of you, leasing is a financing strategy. Typically, we don't lease vehicles. We purchase them outright. But we do some lease purchasing of some large equipment. So I think the short answer is yes, we'd be willing to explore that.
Mr. Fisher?
Thank you. Andrew Fisher, Precinct 13. Given that if this policy is voted in, it will take effect in fiscal year 2021. My question has to do with the vehicles that are scheduled for purchase in fiscal year 2020, which include 2 vans for the building department, a cargo van for the DPW, 2 cruise vehicles for the finance department, a Ford Explorer for $43,000 for the fire department, and other vehicles. Can these vehicles be put on hold until they can be part of the policy? Because this would involve spending well over $100,000 on a half dozen vehicles that would not be compliant with the new policy. I would add that I didn't anticipate that Speaker DeLeo would be proposing this morning a program that would subsidize the funding of alternative fueled vehicles, which poses another reason for putting off the purchase of vehicles in the next fiscal year. I'm just wondering how those vehicles are going to be addressed, whether they can be put on hold until they can be substituted for vehicles that are compliant with the new electric vehicle policy.
Mr. Kleckner?
Yes, Mr. Moderator, Mel Kleckner, Town Administrator. I believe this same question was asked under the budget, and I gave this following answer. The town has agreed to delay procurement of the 2 pool vehicles in the finance department while a comprehensive vehicle policy is developed. The goal is to convert both, or at least move forward with 1 EV. As for other vehicles in the fleet, the Sustainability Administrator will work with the town departments to explore alternative fuel options, grant opportunities, and I was also pleased to see that article this morning, and potential infrastructure needs. If an alternative that falls within the budget and meets the departmental needs becomes available, the town will pursue it. This exercise will also help with policy development and future budget year requests.
Thank you, Mr. Kleckner.
Somebody have a motion? The question's been called. Is there a second? And I have the following people signed up to speak in favor: Ms. Stamfer, Ms. Nobrega, Mr. Ananian, Ms. Scanlon, and Ms. Cunningham. With that, all those in favor of terminating debate, please raise your hands. Those opposed, motion carries by a unanimous vote. Motion carries by a 2/3 vote. On the motion on the yellow supplement, pages 2 through 4, a resolution calling for the electrification of the town's motorized fleet. Those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. That motion does carry unanimously. Article 24. The motion under main motion is on page 24-4, moved by Mr. Lescoyer, seconded by Mr. Van Scoyac, that the town adopt a resolution calling for a procurement policy to annually increase the town's supply of green electricity from renewable sources. You can vote in favor of this even though there's a split infinitive in the heading. Mr. Lescoyer? There are a few of us left, believe me. Worry about that sort of thing.
Mr. Moderator, my name is David Lescoyer, Precinct 11. This is the fourth time that the town's climate action plan has come before us. This is a resolution urging town government make a transition to 100% green electricity by 2050. And this is part of a sustainability framework that I believe is going to guide us, because we're talking not only about the town municipal operations, but the community-wide zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. Here, we're particularly talking about the built environment, mobility, and energy. The built environment, mobility, and energy. They're part of, if we look at the greenhouse gas inventory as a whole, we see that it's 520,000 tons, but the municipal, which is what we're talking about with this warrant article, is only 3% of that. And so what we need to do is what Jesse just said a while ago, is make a transition from fossil fuel sources to greenhouse gas free, and that we do that by both shifting to electric and then making the source of our electricity free. And the first is to reduce our consumption of energy, and in fact the town has been doing that, and our electricity now represents about $2.5 million. It's gone down about 12% from fiscal year 14 to 18. And actually the town as a whole is ahead of us through what we voted several years ago. The Brookline Green Electricity Program has already offset more greenhouse emissions than the town represents. So this is taken from the town's website, and you can Google it by Brookline Green and participate up to 100% if you haven't already. So how does that work? How does it work for the Brookline Green Electricity? How will it work for the town? It will work by raising the amount of green electricity from its current level of 19% to 40% by 2050, because in the next 10 years, the portfolio standard increases like 2%, and after that by 1%. This warrant article is intended to close that 40% gap that would remain by 2060 if the town does nothing. So actually now it's very easy for the town to do this, which is why we're urging that the town go ahead and do it under our climate action plan. Under the current arrangements, under our current contract, it says at any time during the term of this agreement, you may request the purchase of renewable energy certificates. The implementation entails buying more of these certificates. And what are these certificates? It's like when you go to the supermarket and pay a little extra for organic food. It's pesticide-free, hormone-free, chemical-free. The organic has to do with how it was grown. So a certificate has to do with how it was produced. It was produced by wind or solar. It was produced without burning any fuel. So if we, as a town, will now increase by another 1.35% our renewable energy certificate purchases each year for the next, until 2050, we'll reach a 100% goal. So that's basically what this warrant article does. is it urges the town to go ahead and begin step by step, year by year, each year adding about $5,000 to our electricity bill in order to reach fossil fuel free by 2050. So I hope that you'll vote. I'm doing this very quickly in the late night. Favorable action on this warrant article. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vanskoyak.
The intent behind Article 24 is to move the town beyond its current trajectory of achieving 60% of its energy supply from green and renewable sources by 2050, and to achieve 100% of energy supply from green and renewable sources by 2050 will require the town to step up its purchases of renewable energy certificates, as David just described, from the town's current energy supplier. Article 24 resolves to urge the Select Board to direct the appropriation of necessary funds to purchase the additional RECs or RECs. The budgetary impact of purchasing additional RECs annually over the course of fiscal year 2021 to 2050 will be additional yearly increases of approximately $5,000 in the estimate of the petitioner, as you just heard from David. By a vote of 19 to 0 to 3, the Advisory Committee recommends favorable action on the amended Article 24 as worded at the bottom of pages 24, 4 and 24, and the top of 24, 5. Thank you very much. And I neglected to say John Vanskoyak, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 13.
Well, I missed that. Ms. Heller and Ms. Scanlon, would you please come forward?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Nancy Heller for unanimous Select Board. Both David Lescoyer and John Vanskoyak did a good job of explaining why what effect this warrant article would have on the town's green electricity supply, and this is only the municipal supply. So I'm not going to go into that. I just want to take a minute or two to remind you of why we need to do this even more urgently today than just even a week ago or a few days ago. The administration of this country, the Trump administration, has rolled back environmental regulations. It's pulled out of the Paris Climate Accord, which we adopted when we, a couple of years ago by a resolution by John Harris. The Trump administration refutes dire predictions about the climate change. It makes fun and denigrates the term global warming, and to cap it all off, now the administration will prohibit scientists from reporting on the future effects of rapidly warming planet and from giving us a picture of what the Earth could look like if the world continues to burn fossil fuels. So it makes it even more urgent that we take action at the local level. In every town and city in the country, we can control only Brookline, but we must do our part. Please vote favorable action on this resolution. Thank you.
Ms. Scanlon.
Kathleen Scanlon, Precinct 3. I'll be very brief. I just want to add this is an excellent opportunity for the town to lead on this issue as we work with residents of Brookline with the Brookline Green Program to opt up to the Brookline Green programs, which is something that individuals are able to do together with the town. So instead of individually being able to do something, the town has been able to provide something that they can do with bulk purchasing power. This is something that the town can do and help lead by example to help everyone to do their part with electricity. Thank you.
Mr. Franco.
Jim Franco, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 1.
Just a point of clarification. I thought I heard Mr. Van Scoyac say that it would be an increase of $5,000 per year, but the combined reports say $40,000 per year increases.
Mr. Van
Could someone
Scoyac?
answer that?
John Van Scoyac, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 13. Yes, you're correct to point out that there is a difference, but that difference resulted after a consultation by David Lescoyer with people at Town Hall, and he revised his estimated figure. I think you heard him say 5,000. In fact, I know you did. And we also agree with that number. That's the revised number, $5,000.
Mr.
Thank you.
Silverberg?
I'd like to call the question.
No, we're going to hear a couple more questions from the floor. Ms. Frawley?
Regina Frawley, Precinct 16. How does this affect the schools? When I was looking at the different plans, especially the Driscoll, I didn't see it as planning to be completely solar energized or whatever. And when we talk about the town, we usually we distinguish town buildings from school buildings. How is this going to incorporate all buildings by 2050? Thank you.
Mr. Lescoyer?
David Lescoyer, Precinct 11. Yes, we're talking about all buildings. The conditions of appropriations for the Baldwin and Driscoll specifically called for fossil fuel-free systems in the schematic design of those buildings. Similar language has been incorporated into the appropriations for the Pierce. And on Tuesday night last week, we considered two CIP items, one for the fire station and another, well, it was for the Driscoll School. All of these things are coming now. All of our buildings, every time something happens, every time there's equipment that's burning fuel, we need to be looking at it and looking toward 2050. We don't want to be replacing things that we know we're going to have to rip out later on. So this is really part of our process. Now that we have a climate action plan, now that we have a goal, this is how we achieve it.
Mr.
First of all,
Weitzman?
by having clean electricity, and then by transitioning the buildings to rely on it.
Mr. Weitzman?
Don Weitzman, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 8. Mr. Moderator, I wonder if I can ask a show of hands of Town Meeting members who have already opted up to 100% green electricity. Oh, that's beautiful. Not only is the town going to lead because of this resolution, but we as town meeting members do the same for our community. So if you haven't done it yet, it's a phone call away and not terribly expensive. Thank you.
No, we'll take one more question from the floor, which I'm sure will be a brief one.
Very brief. Just to, David
All
Lowe,
right, thank
David Lowe, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 11. Just to add on to Don Weitzman's comment, there's a competition going between Brookline and Newton on a per capita basis for opting up to 100%. So please rally your neighbors so we can beat Newton this time. But a quick question, not to confuse things, but I'm curious if somebody knows the percentage of the town's electricity that could be generated on the top of public buildings, the schools, et cetera, from solar, as compared to buying RECs from sources outside of Brookline, which is also a good thing, just not quite as good.
Mr. Lescoyer, sure you have that answer at your fingertips.
Not for the town for a whole, but specifically for Driscoll School, the feasibility, the schematic design was estimating that 50% of the energy requirements of a very high efficiency building could be met by the solar on the roof. So that isn't maybe typical for all buildings in the town, but it does indicate that there is a tremendous potential there. Also, there's been a feasibility study for putting solar on the Coolidge Corner School, and I believe that estimate was about 40%. And I think one of the things we need to be working on as a town is getting our roofs solarized and doing it in a way that benefits the town, which means the town owns the panels rather than having them owned by investors. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Khan.
Yes, Janice Khan, town meeting member from Precinct 15. I believe Newton is actually winning at this point, this competition, but they are also doing things we are not doing. They are putting photovoltaic canopies over their parking lots. We need to think more creatively in this town as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I have no more speakers and nobody's at the microphone, so we'll go directly to a vote. On the motion on page 24-4 over to 24-5, those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Motion carries unanimously. Now we'll deal with Articles 25 and 26 together. We'll have a single debate. Won't be a debate since there's, oh yes, there will be a debate. The motion under Article 25 is for no action, moved by Ms. Wolf-Ditkoff and seconded by Mr. Green. The motion under Article 26 is found on pages 26-12 to 14, again moved by Ms. Wolf-Ditkoff and seconded by Mr. Green. Mr. Conquest proposed an amendment, but he has withdrawn his amendment. So the only motion before you, affirmative motion, is the motion under Article 26. I call on Ms. Brown.
Hi, my name is Deborah Brown, Precinct 1. You don't see warrant Article 25 up there because luckily we were able to reach a speedy resolution because the town administrator was able to identify funds which negated the need for that warrant article. A quick detour. I have this thing up my nose because I have gut issues. There isn't anything particularly serious, so just wanted to get that out there. So I wanted to start talking about warrant Article 26, which calls for a town-wide equity audit. And why do we need it? Well, you know, race is this town's third rail. It is draining us financially, socially, as well as politically. We don't have strong responses to the structural racism in this town. And whether you're thinking about diversity and inclusion and community relations, low staffing, or limited authority, the failure to implement the core report from 1969, GARE's inability to find a robust footing, what we do with the Commonwealth Compact, or even our ability to consistently report on our diversity findings on an annual basis. We have town policies that inadvertently contribute to racial inequality. What do we do with our community development block grant money? That's at CDBG awards. If we look at some of our, job requirements, do they needlessly restrict or inhibit diversity? Our appointments to boards and commissions, does the lack of transparency have the net effect of impinging upon a more robust conversation? We have minimal to no women and minority-owned contractor requirements in this town. And we have lax auditing. But this didn't just spring up in Brookline. It's part of a national and a regional story. There's some really interesting information, and if you go online and download this presentation, you'll see some footnotes that actually provide information about what redlining really means to us. And I included as a recent example of how our unintended consequences can have racial implications, and it was a Waldo Durgan vote. I think there were 4 people who voted against that warrant article, and I was one of them, and I voted against it largely because we took $3.5 million on the hope that we were going to find somewhere to invest in affordable housing when we could have had an additional 10 units in that building. If I looked at every one of our warrant articles, I can assure you that I could find a racial and economic equity component to it. It's not a deep dive for some of us, but we have to begin to think about that as an important aspect of how we operate if we're ever going to move beyond, constantly touching that third rail. I also wanted to talk about that we need to move away from that whole definition of intent. So-and-so didn't intend to do that. They didn't mean to do it. Well, there's a lot of things I don't mean to do, but if the net effect is to cause harm, then we have to rethink it. I use Gerald Austin as an example. I don't think anybody set out to hurt that man. Everything I've heard, but the net effect, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. And so one of the things that this audit tries to do is to actually move us away from a conversation around just what's going wrong to how do we begin to look forward. And part of that is going to require, I would say, almost everybody in this audience to sort of suspend the way that you process information. I grew up in a household where, we see problems and we look for solutions in this society. But most people, you have the advantage of being able to say that the status quo is working well. I'm asking that you shift from that and say, maybe there's a push here to be had. Now, a couple of groups, Brookline People of Color, we've been meeting, as well as there was a racial equity summit. And we actually identified some key issues. And these are actually issues that you'll see in the warrant article and in particular in the scope of work that spell out some critical issues. Negative police interactions, poor housing, a true lack of workforce diversity. I think there are 5 departments in this town that have no diversity. Or the last time I looked, 0. And that can't be normative, especially when we're trying. Insufficient diversity on boards and commissions. We can improve our educational outcomes. And we don't really have a minority and women-owned business program to think of. But what do we hope to get out of these audits? A blueprint. They're a way forward. They're an opportunity for all of us, and not just the people in this room, but to even be able to get those people that never come to a public meeting to show up where they are and say, what are your priorities? What does yes look like to you? To help the town at least achieve a level of compliance with applicable, state and federal civil rights laws, and they could also be part of a settlement. But we don't end up doing this without having, the right people in place. Now, I'll point to Mel here, because when we approached Mel and we said, Mel, what do you think about this? Mel never said no. He didn't blink. He didn't look over his shoulder and say, I don't see the need for this. He took a deep breath and he said, I've started talking to my folks and we're going to figure out how to do this. That's a level of courage, folks, because it's a substantial departure from the way that we traditionally have done business around how we deal with equity issues. Well, what does this have to do with the warrant article?
Well, Ms. Brown, you've been 8 minutes, and I've given you some extra time because you are the petitioner, and I'll ask your co-petitioners to reduce their time allotment accordingly, but let's plan on wrapping up in a couple of minutes, okay?
I can do it in 2 minutes. But we're going to need the outside consultant. We're going to need somebody with experience undertaking equity audits, in particular racial equity audits. And this is a skill. We're developing a scope of work, and that scope of work focuses on what we expect of the person, and it's very much outcome driven. This is not going to be one of those exercises where we feel good. You know, we all sat in a room and we said, this makes sense. It's like, if we are talking about a women and minority-owned business, then at the end of the day, we've developed a scope for women and minority-owned businesses. If we're talking about improving workforce diversity, then we're going to start asking questions. Why aren't there more people of color? And how do we get more people of color? And why aren't we advertising in the local newspapers where we have a large majority of people of color that use it? Or even at the local colleges and universities? There are a lot of things that we can do, but I think there's a consensus here that bringing in a person that has experience with this, that we'll be able to get, we'll get to yes. We'll get to, much like we were just talking about, being a sustainable community by 2050. I think we ought to have the same kind of goal, that we are a racially equitable community by 2022. I mean, let's think about it that way. And not in abstract terms. So I know you're about ready to give me the hook. So I thank you. I think Susan's going to come up and talk a little bit more about some of the particulars around what the warrant article actually speaks to. But I appreciate your support.
Thank you, Ms. Gelbart. By the way, Ms. Wolf-Dipkoff is not a town meeting member and therefore could not make these motions. So I must have misread the name here. Ms. Brown made both motions, no action under Article 25 and the main motion under Article 26. Ms. Gelbart?
Janet Gelbart, speaking for the advisory committee that recommends favorable action on warrant Article 26 by a vote of 16 to 1 to 1. A couple of months ago, Meet the Press, an interviewee was asked to comment on reparations. And I perceived the response to be very thoughtful, well-reasoned, to a very thorny issue. And then an African-American panelist that day said the candidate didn't even answer the question. We had listened to the same words, but we heard very, very different things, because what we perceive, as Deborah alluded to, is based on what we've experienced. And black people and white people and other people of color in our country perceive reality very, very differently because they experience it very, very differently. The heavy lifting has, as Deborah said, already been done by Mel Kleckner. He found the funds, or at least some of the money originally proposed to get the conversation kick-started, and he's made a pledge to find more if needed. That's important, because sometimes you need that top-down direction to get you where you want to go. I think an outside consultant has an advantage that was not mentioned. That person will not come to Brookline with the same baggage that many of us in Brookline carry because of the issues that we've dealt with recently, and maybe point us to the things that are getting in our way, the things that we don't see, the things that we trip over. And my hope is not just that we get once through this process with an outside consultant showing us the way, and we identify the problems, and we come up with solutions, and we go back and measure, but that from that process, we learn enough to make it iterative all the time so we don't become complacent again and remain who we think we are. somebody to show us and help us measure and keep us on track to living our ideals. So I hope that you vote favorable action on warrant Article 26, and that will put the weight of town meeting behind the actions that Town Administrator Kleckner and the Select Board have already taken. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Green.
Bernard Green, Chair of the Select Board, speaking for a unanimous Select Board for favorable action on the motion offered by the Advisory Committee. This warrant article envisions engaging the services of a consultant to assist the town in identifying areas where the equity goals that are listed in the warrant article may be achieved across town departments. The Advisory Committee added important language, in my view, specifically referencing the key aspects of the process used by the Government Alliance on Race and Equity program that the town is working with. You can see the language added on page 26-14 of your materials. It mentions specifically working with appropriate town employees and community groups and other Brookline entities and organizations on this process. Very concrete. The Select Board agreed to that and other changes, and by a vote of 5-0, the Select Board voted favorable action on the warrant articles as amended by the Advisory Committee. Before I get into this warrant article any further, it's important to state something that shouldn't have to be stated, but unfortunately does. Brookline is a community that has made great strides in achieving many of the equity goals listed in this warrant article. Mr. Conquest, in his withdrawn motion that was offered to amend the main motion, recognized these strides. I'll talk about that more, but he withdrew the motion, so. An illustration that we should not let a lack of perfection distract us from the many equity, diversity, and inclusion achievements of our town. This warrant article reflects the town's commitment to go beyond those substantial achievements to learn how we can do even better. Mr. Conquest's motion, even though withdrawn, does raise some important questions that the consultant should address, such as how this process will differ from or build on the achievements of past efforts, and whether there is a need for further defining the task of the consultant to better identify and explain the achievable incremental steps towards the equity goals that will be recognizable by Brookline's leaders and residents. The Select Board does not think that a moderator's committee is necessary to address these and other concerns of the Conquest motion. That was in my notes here before I found out about the withdrawal of the motion, so excuse me on that. In terms of specific tasks related to racial equity, I want to raise a couple things. First, I note that the black population of Brookline is about 3.2%, and the Hispanic population is about 4.7%. I've raised this issue many times. I hope that the consultant focuses on practical steps that can be taken to increase those numbers in order to overcome the history of intentional race-based segregation of Boston and Boston suburbs, such as Brookline. This is not included as an explicit equity goal, but should be an additional area of focus for the consultant. It's a difficult issue, it's a complex issue, it's not going to be solved overnight, but we can start towards that goal. I also note that the East Asian and South Asian combined populations of Brookline is approximately 17%.
You have 1 minute.
Oh, talk fast then. Here the focus should be on the equity goal of increasing this population's participation in the civic life of Brookline, including town boards and commissions and town meeting and other leadership positions. Specifically, the consultant should answer the question, are there impediments to this population's participation that we are not seeing. These are the type of issues that the consultant can address and identify practical incremental steps to achieve the equity goals. And on a parallel track, let me mention, the Select Board is working to engage an independent consultant to advise the Select Board on how to deal with the difficult and complex, with no easy answers, issues of race that the Select Board has faced in the past and will face in the future. We're taking this step because we know the complexities of some of these issues are such that even me as a black person may not fully understand, and none of us, black or white in this audience, should think that we can automatically understand how to address when they hit us suddenly.
Please conclude, sir.
So I hope you vote with the Select Board in favor for favorable action on warrant Article 26. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Weintraub?
I'm Bob Weintraub, new town meeting member from Precinct 9, and it feels good to be back at this podium. Thank you.
You better hold your applause until you hear what he has to say.
So as I reviewed warrant articles for this town meeting, I came across Articles 25 and 26, and I actually experienced a daymare. And to quote Yogi Berra, it was deja vu all over again. Up to $250,000 for independent consultants to assess the culture of diversity in our town government and make recommendations. My brain was flooded with examples of expensive consultants that I've experienced in my professional life who were hired to help us solve our problems, often in sensitive areas like race and poverty and culture, and they mostly disappointed. I preface everything I say with a degree of equivocation. Life is complex, organizations are complex. To make generalizations is risky, so I just call upon my own experience. Here's one story. In the early 2000s, the Brookline Public Schools hired an expensive consultant from Cambridge, Massachusetts to address the problem of the underachievement of African American students. About 25 teachers and school leaders met monthly over the academic year, exploring the problem and generating responses. At one of the final meetings, the consultant, a smart and good person, presented a flow chart that she said was the summary of our work. She called it the Big Dog. It looked like the map of the New York City subway system, only more inscrutable. I looked at it, my eyes glazed over like a character in a William Steig children's story. I raised my hand, I said something like, I think I just may not be smart enough to understand this thing. The consultant said, yeah, neither am I. So I stood up and walked out, saying something like, I can't spend any more time on this. I'm going back to my school to do some real work. And the results of that year-long consultant-led study, nothing. Here's a counter-narrative. At a senior cabinet meeting at Brookline High in 2008, frustration was expressed again about the very few African-American students in high-level math classes at our school. This was not a new conversation, but nothing meaningful or effective had been done to address the problem. I take responsibility for that. At this meeting, Dr. Adrian Mims, Dean of Students, said something like, what we really have to do is to provide our African-American students with the kind of advantages that their more affluent peers receive from their families and communities. That was an epiphany for us. The Calculus Project was born, a school-based 5-year organic innovation developed by the professionals at the schoolhouse. Dr. Mims owned the program and made sure that it succeeded. No consultant needed, and it worked. Last June, we celebrated the graduation from college of the first cohort of the Calculus Project. Research tells us that completion of calculus in high school increases students' chances of graduating from college in 6 years by 300%. 21 students were in the first cohort of the Calculus Project at Brookline High. All 21 graduated from college in 4 years. I have many more stories of experiences with outside consultants that didn't work because they took a long time to understand the complexity of our organization, because they reflected top-down initiatives that were introduced without the voices of line staff. They too often reflected a particular theory or idea that was the brand of the consultant and never connected with the organizational culture. and because it seemed like hiring the consultant to address a serious problem was the solution. It communicated to the organization that top management was doing something. That was never enough. And I also have many stories of organic, practice-driven innovation and change that happened at the line, at the schoolhouses, at organizations. Like Metco, created by Bob Sperber in collaboration with the Boston Public Schools. Like Beak.
1 minute.
1 minute. These guys had a lot more time than me total. Facing History was developed at the Runkle School. BEEP was developed here at the ground level. The Brookline Police Academy was created as a collaboration between the police department here and the school department. School within a school at Brookline High School is the longest running democratic alternative high school in our country. Brookline High is well known nationally as a lighthouse community, responding thoughtfully to local problems that are also national challenges. And here's one final story. I know I have a minute. So under the leadership of Dr. Jim Walsh, back in the 1990s, we had another task force that was designed to develop core values for the schools. And we worked for a year, no consultant. We did it ourselves, teachers, parents, students, administrators. And we developed 4 core values, which I know today: high achievement for all students, excellence in teaching, understanding and respect for human differences, collaborative relations. 25 years later, those school-based developed core values remain.
You have 1 minute.
I have 1 minute. Okay. That's not right.
Okay.
I rehearsed this, and it was like 5 minutes. All of a sudden, it turned into not enough time. Okay, author conquest. He acknowledges that racial progress has been made in Brookline. 4 principals in Brookline are people of color. 3 central office school administrators are people of color. Thank you, Andrew Bott. 2 town departments are led by people of color. Bernard Green is chair of the select board. Raul Fernandez is on the select board. All of this is about making a commitment to having our town government look more like our world. It was accomplished by us, department leaders and voters, without consultants. We embraced our responsibility to make our town reflect our values. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Wolf-Dickoff. And Ms. Stamfer, would you please come forward if you still wish to speak?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Susan Wolf-Dickoff. I'm on the school committee, but I'm not representing them. I'm speaking as an individual and a co-petitioner. I'd like to start with a quotation from Alice in Wonderland, which is that if you don't know where you're going, any road will do. And to some extent, we've made a lot of progress, but we also don't know everything here in Brookline, and I don't know anyone who thinks that we do. And I don't know anyone who thinks that we don't need expert help, particularly when we're thinking about taking a racial equity lens and municipal best practices and what it takes to really be a leader in this country. Our country is at an important crossroads in grappling with racism, given the persistent and present-day effects of institutional and systemic privilege. And we know that Brookline is not immune from this reckoning. But what we aren't clear on is our goals with respect to racial equity. What does success look like, besides some very, very important steps forward? Due to the lateness of the hour and the moderator's temper, I will skip my soaring rhetoric. I will get specific. How are we doing with respect to hiring and promoting leaders of color in our town departments? What more could we be doing? What more should we be doing? How are our residents of color experiencing town services? What are the unintentional effects of racism and racial privilege in our town policies and practices? So let's agree with Dr. Weintraub's excellent points that if our report looks like the New York City subway system, it's a failure. Let's agree that we are unique just like everybody else and that we have things to learn. Let's agree that tone-deaf and top-down consultancies will fail. But for every one of the indicators that I mentioned, we need a spirit of creativity and a spirit of inquiry. What can we learn from others? No matter how well-intentioned our staff, we simply do not have the internal resources in our town departments right now to undertake this work. We need to set them up for success with resources and political will, and that's what this warrant article is about. And I truly commend Town Administrator Mr. Kleckner, the Chief Diversity Officer, Dr. Gelano, the Select Board, the Advisory Committee, and others for recognizing this reality. And that's why the beginning of funds have already been identified, and time and commitment of both, time and resources have both been committed to convey that seriousness and intent of purposes. To be sure, this warrant article will not end racism, nor is it intended to, but it will express your will, Brookline's political will, that our town needs to undertake an independent, fact-based analysis of how we're doing on the most important indicators of racial equity. It'll provide information that our town administrator and his department heads are asking for, which is what are we trying to achieve and what can we learn from others, and what investments do we need to be making as a town in order to achieve our ambitions as a fair and just town for everyone. So to accelerate this work, there were a number of deliverables that were identified. One is creating a landscape and profile of municipal best practices. Who is making progress on identifying and achieving their racial equity goals? Working with our town departments to help build their capacity through the GARE framework. This is not something that gets dropped on them. It's something that is done together with them and builds capacity as we go. It's also done in conjunction with community members, with a community support group that represents not only residents of color, which we, to my knowledge, have never had in Brookline, but elevates those voices and those priorities in the process. It also, in the scope of work, identifies overall and specific multi-year equity goals for each town department, indicators to say, are we making progress or aren't we against those goals, initiatives, cultural shifts, innovations to be implemented, and money that needs to go with it to encourage innovation from the ground up. And finally, it gives all of us, town meeting, the town, a sense of the resources required to achieve these goals over time. There are, in fact, a number of exciting things happening on the school side with respect to anti-racism, professional development, the hiring and the promotion, thank you, the hiring and the promotions that Dr. Weintraub mentioned, career pathing and cohorts for not only principals of color, but educators of color, curriculum, scope and sequence, all kinds of incredible things are happening, but they're happening because there are resources dedicated to them. So I just want to conclude by saying that we have very high expectations here in Brookline, and rightfully so, but I don't think anyone thinks we are currently living into those expectations. So if you agree that this is a top priority, then we need to provide our town staff the clarity of that political will. We need to provide our town administrator and the department heads with the information they need on how we're doing and what we should be aspiring to when we seek racial equity, and a plan to implement it, to live into those values. So I urge you to please vote favorable action on warrant article 26.
Thank you, Ms. Stanford.
Well, after those wonderful speeches, I have very little to add.
Let's identify yourself, please.
Claire Stanford, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 5. Especially the specifics given by Susan Ditkoff just now. But I thank the petitioners for bringing this article and for everybody who's spoken, because I think this article is a very important step that we can take as a community for knowing ourselves better and learning what we need to do to heal ourselves. I think one of the especially valuable pieces of this article is asking for an independent, professional outside consultant. I think that will help us to have an outside set of eyes looking at us. We'll see things that we don't see in ourselves, and will help us go forward to be the good community that we want to be. Please vote for Article 26. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sandman.
Mike Sandman, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 3, member of the Advisory Committee, and one of the 3 petitioners on this article. I will be brief, I promise. In the book Thinking Fast and Slow, Daniel Kahneman wrote, "The premise of this book is that it's easier to recognize other people's mistakes than our own." Kahneman won a Nobel Prize for showing that economic decisions were often irrational, and there were discernible patterns to that irrationality. But we don't recognize our own irrationality, which is why we do things that we would perceive as being stupid if we saw somebody else do them, like our kids. I was a management consultant for 27 years. The line on consultants is, you ask a consultant what time it is, she takes your watch, tells you the time, and keeps the watch. How does that work? like Kahneman said, it's easier for an outsider to see what's really going on. It remains for the insiders to implement the corrections. No question, that is an absolutely necessary component. Just the same, it's easier for an outsider to see the unseen matrix of policies and procedures in a town that keep some people and some groups at a disadvantage. Once we see what's not working, once it's pointed out to us, what do we do about it? The petitioners have worked very closely with the town administrator, and he's worked very closely with us to develop a request for proposal that doesn't stop at an inventory of what's not working and a report that will stay on the shelf. We're looking for concrete steps, help monitoring the implementation of those steps, and after a reasonable interval, a review of what's worked, what hasn't, and where we go from there. Mr. Kleckner's on board. He assures us that his department heads are on board, and we know that the select board is on board. Now what we need is for you to get on board.
Mr. Lepson? Then we'll move to questions from the floor or comments.
Hello, Robert Lepson for Town Meeting Member Precinct 9, speaking for the Diversity Commission. Unanimous Diversity Commission in favor of warrant Article 26. I don't want to spend a lot of time up here because what has been said has been quite informative and quite complete, but there is what I did do was, and I encourage everybody to do this at some point if you haven't done it already, is take a look at the website, the GARE website. There is a lot of fabulous information that we can all access very, very easily. And there are some terrific action plans and action steps that can be done. I believe this is really a beginning step. There is something else that I do want to just mention here that I pulled from one of the booklets here. GARE's recommended theory of change does the following. There are 3 items here. Number 1, normalize. Establish racial equity as a key value by developing a shared understanding of key concepts across the entire jurisdiction and create a sense of urgency to make changes. Number 2, organize. Build staff and organizational capacity, skills, and competencies through training while also building infrastructure to support the work like internal organizational change teams and external partnerships with other institutions and community. And number 3, operationalize. Put theory into action by implementing new tools for decision-making, measurement, and accountability. Ultimately, what we're talking about is we're talking about transformative change, changing government, changing the way we function, the way we think, the way we look at the world. That's the power of GARE. And this is a fabulous warrant article, and this is moving that process forward, and I strongly urge everybody to vote yes on warrant Article 26. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, we're going to take a couple of questions and comments from the floor, but I'm sure those standing at the microphones understand what time it is and that perhaps they can make their comments and questions very brief. Yes, sir.
Hi, Bob Miller, Precinct 8. I apologize if this is in the material I have, but I'm wondering that I appreciate that Mr. Kleckner has found money for at least some of this, but I'm not sure whether there's been identified what the cost beyond that would be.
Mr. Kleckner.
Mel Kleckner, Town Administrator. So I have been able to identify $150,000 worth of funds from a special trust fund called the BAA, or the Boston Athletic Association Trust Fund, which were amounts that were paid by the BAA over a series of years. I don't know what the full cost of this project is. I believe $150,000 is a lot of money, and hope to get a lot accomplished, but at this point, I have made a general commitment that if it's not enough, we'd we look very hard for additional money, but I don't have a number in mind right now, Bob.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Weintraub.
Yes, since I didn't have an opportunity to read the last page of my speech, I just want to say a couple more things. Fortune magazine.
Well, you better identify yourself once again,
What?
if you will. Please identify yourself once again.
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Bob Weintraub, town meeting member, precinct 9.
New town meeting member.
New town meeting member. I don't know what's going on. Okay. So Fortune magazine, a couple of years ago, said that Brookline's the second smartest community in the country. So today, I was talking to one of those smart people, talking about this, the Warren articles, and this person said, how about instead of spending $250,000 on a consultant, we create signing bonuses of $25,000, 10 signing bonuses to recruit teachers of color, leaders of color in the school system, not in the school system, and also in the town agencies. And what he said was, what's better, a $250,000 report from a consultant or 10 signing bonuses for outstanding professionals of color in this town? And here's another idea that I've talked about with a number of people, which is a pretty serious idea that would need some support. And I would recommend thinking about establishing a model Truth and Reconciliation Commission in the town of Brookline as a national model to face the history of racism in our community and to face the history of racism in this country and to make ongoing recommendations as issues of social justice appear in this community as they always will. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pelkey.
Linda Olson-Pelkey, Precinct 2. I have a question about the scope of the audit that we're talking about, because the resolution, as written on page 2613, talks about doing this study to promote equity goals, and then it defines equity goals as goals related to persons based on race, ethnicity, income, disability, gender identity, language status, immigration status, religion, or family composition. And I think that there is equity goals that are valid for all of those groups. So I'm wondering, are we looking at all of those, or are we only concerned with the racial justice?
Mrs. Wolf-Dickoff? It's a fair question.
Susan Wolf-Dickoff, co-petitioner. Two answers to it. The first is that when we think about equity, all of those aspects of people are envisioned in it. Intersectionality is a very important aspect of equity goals. That said, we have to start somewhere, and racial equity felt like the right place to start for a whole variety of reasons. So that's one set of things. So the initial inquiry will be on racial equity. That said, when surveys are done, when data is collected, sometimes it's easier to collect all of it at once rather than just collect one piece of it. So I think that is part of the scope of work that Mr. Kleckner was talking about, which is how do you kind of parse that out? If once we're doing the data collection or we're surveying town residents, it's probably easier to ask all the questions at once rather than just a very narrow set of questions. I will also point anyone, if you have not read Angela Glover Blackwell's article, The Curb Cut Effect, to read it. It's about how universal design principles, if you design something for people who use wheelchairs, for example, it benefits people who use strollers, people who use delivery people who are, have carts. So when you think about universal design for one set of special needs or special uses, it often benefits everyone. So I do think that there's sort of the umbrella effect, even though that said there are different issues that affect different populations. But the focus will start on racial equity.
Thank you. Mr. Conquest?
Arthur Conquest, Precinct 6. I withdrew my request for a moderator's referral committee because I had a meeting with Ms. Brown, a 2-hour meeting with Ms. Brown this afternoon. That's not to say that I don't have concerns still, and I'm going to communicate with the other town meeting members on the website, the town meeting member site, just so that you hear the concerns that I still have that I'm sure that can be worked out at some point in the future. The most important thing, you have to communicate with the Black and Latino community, okay? white supremacy is dead. Communicate with us directly, please. Thank you.
Ms. Khan?
Janice Khan, town meeting member from Precinct 15. My biggest concern is that we are paying for a consultant's report that's going to sit on a shelf. And I just want to remind, there are people sitting here today, I know, who took part in this, but about 20 years ago, there was a town-wide conversation called Future Search, and that led to concrete changes. One was a comprehensive plan that actually had action plans attached to it with things that we could do in a community. It didn't just sit on a shelf. And the other thing that happened was it created the Brookline Neighborhood Alliance. And I really think that instead of spending money on yet another consultant's report, we should think about putting money into having a town-wide conversation and bring everybody to the table and really then deal with the issues, not have somebody from outside tell us what to do.
Thank you, Mr. Levy.
Mark Levy, town meeting member, Precinct 7. And I'm very disturbed at the advisory committee's version of the motion that they've offered, that they take out the word independent, and then they describe how they want that consultant to work, and don't give him the scope or her the scope or them the scope to find their own method after working on this problem within Brookline. I do think having some kind of a consultant is really very useful at this point, but I don't think having somebody report back to the fall town meeting on racial equity makes a lot of sense, because I don't think there's even time to prepare a decent RFP, get the responses replied, and then make a decision on who we shall hire in that time. And I'm afraid that the pace that's being set and the amount of money that's being raised, it means that we're going to have an underfunded, undertimed report with the town department heads breathing over the shoulder of the consultant, and I'm trying to impose, whether it's conscious or not, the town's basic culture on that consultant, when what we want is somebody to look at that culture from the outside and tell us where we might be doing better. And I think there's all kinds of areas where we need to have that done. Housing, racial equity, ethnic equity, linguistic groups, bringing more people of color into the town. All of these are important. All of these are things that we don't do very well at this point, and we need to do better. So I will support the motion, because it's the only motion on the table, but I have some deep reservations whether it'll be enough. And clearly, the bottom line is the selectmen and the advisory committee and us on the town meeting are going to have to be open-minded and willing to accept some painful ideas that what we've been doing and what makes sense to us may not make sense to people from other communities. So thank you very much. Bye.
So, Mr. Levy, on the timing issue, the way this has happened in the past is that if a report is not ready, a comprehensive type of report of the kind that I'm sure that the town administration will be seeking, by the fall town meeting, we'll have a report that the report isn't ready, and its submission will be deferred. I don't think that's ever been too much of a problem. And we only have one more person at the microphone, and I'm not going to take a motion for the question with just one victim. So, sir?
Yeah, okay, so I'm Nathan Spritz, I'm Precinct 16, town meeting member, and I strongly support the motion, but we've heard a little bit of a difference of opinion, and I'd like to hear from the petitioners for a second. I believe that the consultant will give us a look in a mirror that we could not otherwise honestly get by looking at this question for ourselves and by trying some alternative process. I'd just like to hear from the petitioners how much more likely it will be that we will be able to see a more honest picture of the problems facing Brookline so that we can begin a conversation amongst ourselves going forward and fixing this, or if you believe in Mr. Weintraub's or Ms. Khan's alternative views. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't think that calls for a comment, Ms. Wolf-Dickoff, at this hour. On the motion at the bottom of page 26-12 over to 26-14, those in favor, please raise your hands. Those opposed? Motion carries by a majority vote. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn town meeting until 7 o'clock on Thursday. Is there a second? All those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, no. Motion carries. The town meeting is adjourned until 7 o'clock on Thursday. Thank you.